What's up back guys, we are back with another story. What if Bella risked everything to save Edward? So let's get started. Granger Residence 1985. The front door slamming loudly startles her from her fitful slumber, plunging the little 5-year-old girl from one nightmare, right into another. Only this one far more real than the one she had just escaped. I don't care for your whining Jean. Nor do I care for your poor excuses. The voice of her father sends shivers of pure terror down a tiny body that looks more bones than skin. Dry bread, a cup of water, and the occasional scrap of leftover food being scarcely enough to sustain the child's growing body. His voice was something she didn't think she would ever not fear hearing. This is not hot, it is warm, though that particular tone he was using now caused her more dread than usual. It meant only one thing. He was furious with her mother. For what? She did not know or understand, not that it would matter. What did was that usually when he was that angry, her mother was not the only one who would suffer the consequences of whatever her mother had done or not done to earn his ire. I go to work every day to keep us in house and home. To feed you and the child you so desperately wanted. The very least you could do was have a hot meal on the table for me to come into. She could hear the force of his hand connecting with her mother's body as he struck, the first of many, she knew. You're nothing but a worthless Omega whore. This slap was followed by a muffled cry of pain that caused tears to begin to trickle down a small thin face, as her doe-like brown eyes blinked rapidly, their sole focus the basement door that led into the main house. It was currently locked from the outside. Acton G is a barrier between her and her father. For now, I could have had any Omega. How did I end up with such a useless excuse for one? The thud and scream that followed told Hermione her mother had foul. Yet she dare not even attempt to see whether or not her mother was okay. You only have one job. To serve. To do what you can to please me. Another slap, another muffled cry. To give me pups, to feed me, to keep the house clean. Yet you failed at them all and now I'm stuck with someone else's spawn and a worthless servant too. The importance of those words were lost on the child as she cowered beneath the thin holy blanket that had far past seeing better days. What did catch her attention was the movement above her, the clunk of boots that seemed to move closer and closer to the door that currently shielded her. She could already smell his anger as it seeped through every crevice it could find. The thick oppressive scent of dominant pheromones wasn't something the little 5-year-old knew much about. All she understood was that it was unpleasant on her nose, her fear spiking in response as the scent grew stronger with every step he took closer to the basement door. Where are you, rat? No use hiding yourself. Her stomach churned as the lock clicked, the door flung wide as his boots appeared on the stairs. Heavy and foreboding as he stumbled unsteadily down towards the little Omega girl, now openly whimpering in her terror. You're just as bad, just a disgusting, useless, pathetic little Omega. His words were punctuated by a fist colliding with her chin as he finally reached her, sending the small girl flying backwards from her place on the floor. She didn't have time to even raise her arms to shield her face as the next fist came sailing at her. Or the next, until her head felt heavy and blood trickled down from her nose and mouth and her eyes went funny, the lights seeming to dim as everything became foggy. I should never have agreed to take you in. Disgusting, he spat, his saliva hitting her somewhere but she couldn't focus. The next fist turned her world to darkness. Granger Residence 1988. Hermione. Hurry up, you worthless girl. Her mother's voice was impatient as she called through, prompting the little 8-year-old to move faster as she tried to watch where she was going. Peering over the large tea tray filled with her mother and father's most expensive chinas. The china set was only ever brought out when her parents had guests over. Important guests. Blank, underscore, blank. She had learned by now that guests mean tea. Her already more than difficult expectations would be even more difficult for her to manage. Like for instance how in the world she was supposed to hurry up when the heavy tray she was struggling to carry was so big she couldn't see her feet. When the china shook as her arms struggled to maintain the weight they carried. Now, the demand was shouted, impatient and angry, and she forced her feet to move faster. Desperate to get this over with, to spare herself the pain that would come if she were to anger her mother any more than she already had. As she entered the sitting room she stumbled, losing her balance slightly. The added weight of the tea tray tipping her as she scrambled to regain her balance. Too late she realized her grip on the tray had loosened in her panic to remain upright. The sound of crashing mugs as they shattered on the floor, splashing hot liquid across the cream carpets and over the 8-year-old's feet. Her cry of pain ignored as her mother rose from her seat. Furious. "How dare you!" Words hissed as the woman she called mother advanced. Gripping little arms, feet dragged across shattered china, cutting through her skin as nails dug into her slim arms. Words of disgust and anger spat in a tear-stained face. The blows that followed only adding to the pain that already ran rampant through a malnourished body. The guest looking on with barely conceal. Glee as the little 8-year-old Omega was punished with blow after blow for her failure to serve. She lost track of time, lost track of the blows or the ongoing of what was happening around her. He cold hard concrete if the basement floor was the next thing she was aware of as her body was flung onto it. The impact knocking the breath from her lungs. "You are hardly worth the trouble we went through getting you." Worthless little Omega. The door slamming, locks clicking in place signaling the end of her mother's care to deal with her. Hermione half crawled half pulled her body across the floor and onto her tattered blanket. Wrapping herself up tightly, warding off the cold the best she could as she sobbed silently. Her thin frame heaving violently. It seemed to take forever for her mind to finally shut down. Horror-filled nightmares taking over her consciousness yet again. Platform 9 3/4 1991. "You have our name. Don't you dare shame us by thinking you are better than what you are, girl. Do you understand me?" Dirty nails dug into slender arms as her father shook her hard. The force behind his action snapping the 11-year-old head back and forth painfully. "Yes, Alpha, I understand," her whispered words of agreement said automatically. Years of abuse ingrained in her mind as she looked at him fearfully. "You do not want to know what your mother and I would do to you if you should get ideas above your station. You are nothing but a filthy little Omega. Your job is to serve. Nothing else." His words punctuated by tightening hands that succeeded in piercing thin flesh. "Doctor," awing blood and leaving crescent moon marks in Hermione's arms. "I won't hesitate to bring you home and teach you exactly what your purpose will always be should I hear you embarrassed me in any way, girl. You'll wish we never picked you up from that filthy orphanage." She nodded, saying what she needed to get him to let go of her. Finally allowing her to move away from his side to board the train. He didn't register the icy blue eyes of the blonde witch as she walked towards the Hogwarts Express. She hadn't noticed at all that the older woman had watched the whole interaction between father and daughter. A look of utter disgust etched on Narcissa Malfoy's face as she took in the clearly underweight Omega Muggle-born girl and her father as he warned her. Icy blue eyes narrowing in anger at the rough treatment of a child. Nor did she see the same icy blue eyes follow her onto the train as she boarded. Eyes alight with concern for Hermione's welfare. Hermione knew deep down that this was her chance at happiness and freedom. The train she hoped would take her to a place she knew to be filled with magic and learning. A place she hoped would allow her to finally break free from the terror. She lived daily under the constant threat of father's ire or mother's punishing hands. When the kind Alpha, Professor McGonagall, the young witch, for she was a witch according to McGonagall, had told her of the magical world and the school she had been invited to attend, she couldn't help but finally allow her heart to hope for a better, brighter future. A future in which she no longer had to fear for her life. She patted her pocket, feeling the magic. Her magic, she reminded herself, hum in content as her hand brushed the wand tucked into her pocket. It was 10 3/4 of an inch long with a dragon heartstring core. A powerful wand, McGonagall had told her. Meant for a powerful witch. She hoped that was true. Taking a seat in an empty compartment, she pulled her new bag, gifted by McGonagall, and pulled out her new favorite book in the many she had got the week before last when the professor had taken her on her first ever trip to the magical world. Hogwarts. A history, another gift from the professor. As had been all of her school supplies, even the books for Beta and Alpha students that she had been warned to keep hidden, had been gifted to the young brunette by the professor. Hermione didn't know why McGonagall had been so kind. But she wouldn't allow herself to question it. This was after all her new start, right? She wouldn't get herself bogged down with worries such as a witch's kindness. She was choosing to hope things were now going to be better. So much better than they had been. She allowed a small smile to slip across her face as she made her way on board the train that sat on platform 9 3/4. The whistle signaling their departure. Hogwarts. March 1995. She squeezed her eyes shut tightly, head coming to rest on the staircase as she gripped it. Trying desperately to keep her breathing hollow if only to avoid breathing in another lungful of dominant, aggressive, disgusting alpha pheromones that surrounded the halls no matter where she went. She could never get away from the scent. It was permanently engraved in the air, cloying and sickly as it demanded all those not of alpha status bow down to their betters. She was a powerful witch, Hermione knew that. Far stronger than anyone in her year, far brighter and fat, more intelligent too, but she knew better than to show anyone that she could withstand the majority of alpha pheromones she came across. She had learnt very young that she could fight the need to submit when assaulted by the demanding scent. Yet doing so had always brought her pain. Pain in the form of fists that would connect with her fragile body, with no concern as to the damage they would leave in their wake. She hated the scent, hated having to submit to all those, more worthy, despite the fact she was far better, magically and intellectually than any she had come across both in the Muggle and in the wizarding world. She wished though that she could find anywhere at all she would be safe to relax, to be breathe without that cloying scent bombarding her senses, forcing her to submit for no other reason than she would be beat if she didn't. Such were the expectations of being an Omega. She had ran here from the Great Hall, desperate for even a minute to breathe away from Harry, away from Ron, and away from the ever-present watchful eye of the headmaster. When she had come to Hogwarts she had hoped T.S. would be a fresh start for her to grow and learn in a place where she would be free from harm. Her hope had been so very short-lived. Upon arriving she had been sorted into Gryffindor House. She had been ecstatic when she realized her head of house was the kind alpha, Professor McGonagall, who had been so generous with her. But Harry Potter was an alpha, his fast friend Ronald Weasley was a beta, and Hermione quickly found that views of Omegas here in the wizarding world were no better than the way the Muggle world viewed them. To make it worse for her, she had no magical family to protect her. She was a Muggle born, a mudblood apparently, and because she had no wizarding family to protect her from the worst if the treatment like Ginny Weasley did, she was subjected to the worst of the abuse. She was quickly shown her place as Harry's Omega. Her job was to please him, to protect him, and she had lost count of the many times she had been forced to risk her own life to save his and Ron's. From facing a troll and a dark wizard to facing werewolves, and now she was carrying him through the Tri-Wizard tournament. She knew if he failed or was seriously injured it would be her to suffer. She was responsible for ensuring he knew what he needed to know to survive and win. The headmaster, Professor Dumbledore, had made that clear. He had already faced a dragon in the first task and fought Grindylows in the water of Black Lake for the second task. All that was left was the finale, and Hermione dreaded it. She knew it would be the most dangerous, the task most likely to bring her pain when Harry got hurt, because he was supposed to be the boy who lived. He was the wizarding world's hero, the prophesied savior that would defeat the Dark Lord once and for all. He had survived the evil man's killing curse as a baby, and as such Britain had hailed him, worshipping the ground he walked on as if he were some sort of messiah. Yet Hermione knew he was nothing special. He wasn't very powerful, nor was he very bright. He hadn't been the one to defeat the Dark Lord as a baby, Hermione knew. She had heard the stories, and as she was the brightest witch of her age she had figured out that the only reason he had survived that killing curse was because of his mother. His Omega mother, whose sacrifice of unconditional love towards her baby had created a protection around an infant Harry, saving his life. The only proof he had faced the Dark Lord lay in the form of a lightning bolt scar on his forehead and the bodies of his parents laying upon the floor of his nursery. She knew she needed to try find somewhere to hide. Harry had been in a particular bad mood today, and like her father, Harry had the habit of taking out those particular bad moods on her. She still had the bruised ribs from his last bad mood. She didn't want more to add to the collection. "Hello, Hermione Wright." The soft sweet voice accompanied by the soothing scent of lilac and rosemary startled her from her internal panic. She glanced up nervously, expecting to come face to face with new torment at the hands of this new alpha. The soft, concerned expression on the blonde Vila's face as she stood in front of Hermione was perhaps more frightening than the looks of disgust she was used to. It was jarring. The only alpha ever to show her kindness was McGonagall, and that was in secret when the older woman tended to her wounds and made sure she was fed, effectively mothering her whenever she could get Hermione away from prying eyes. "It is all right, I do not wish to harm you, I want to help. Please, if you've old, follow me." A tender tone and an offered hand, and as much as she was weary, as much as she was fearful of this French woman, Fleur Delacour, one of the rival school's champion. She knew better than to refuse an alpha when they asked something of her. She took the offered hand and let herself be guided up the stairs. Hogwarts, June 24, 1995. Hermione curled herself up the best she could on the soft carpeting beside the lit fire, greedily drinking in the heat emitted from the soft orange flames as they danced, casting a gentle orange hue around the cozy little room she had conjured for herself as she willed her body to finally stop spasming so hard, the all too familiar after effects of suffering the Cruciatus curse racking her already beaten body. She knew it was unfair, so very unfair for her to have been held responsible for what had happened. There was no way she could have known Bartimus Crouch Jr. was posing as Alistair Moody. No way she could have known H.E. had created a portkey out of the cup that would take Harry to a graveyard in Little Hangleton unprotected, and there was certainly no way for her to have known the Dark Lord would rise once again tonight. She couldn't have known, and yet just like predicted she had been held responsible. Her failures had been the cause of this all. Apparently, she knew that was a load of hippogriff's dung. As only 14, how was she supposed to know everything, act against everything and protect the boy who lived from everything? It was an impossible ask, and for the first time in her young life she felt the beginnings of anger seep into her mind. Anger at the injustice of her life, anger at the situation, and anger at those around her that saw her as nothing more than their little mudblood slave. Fleur had shown her this room many months ago, told her to use it whenever she needed safety or a break from her daily torment. The room of requirement had indeed become her sanctuary, the room able to conjure anything she so desired. From books, to food, to a bath and clean clothes, she could access everything, and the best thing was no one could get to her in here. No one could enter with the intention of causing her any sort of harm. She had willed it to be so, and therefore the only two people who could likely enter were Fleur and Professor McGonagall. The only two people in this world she trusted. Ever since Fleur had led her to this room, Hermione had spent every moment she could immersing herself in the literature, spells and histories of the magical world, teaching herself everything that she could. It surprised her how quickly she took in the new information, even more so how quickly she grasped the new spells available to her. Unfortunately though, short of brewing herself a pie-en potion and a muscle relaxant, there was nothing she could do about her current state until the tremors subsided. As she drifted off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that she would not be harmed any further for now, the Vila's words whispered softly through her mind. Words of encouragement and hope she had long ago lost as a first-year Muggle-born Omega trying to survive in the nightmare that was to become her Hogwarts experience. The way Brishan works is archaic and barbaric. It's the last to practice such vulgarity. You deserve better, Hermione. You are worth so much more than the way they treat you. Hogwarts, January 16, 1996. Why can't you ever do anything correctly, stupid bloody Omega mudblood? Ron's voice is taunting as he looms over her, his face red with anger, almost blending his skin in with the ghastly red she had come to associate with the Weasleys. Harry laughing as he watched on from the sidelines. Ron having decided to push her as they came out of their fifth-year potions class while Hermione walked past. You're useless, honestly don't know why Dumbledore says we need you around, he spat, aiming a boot at her ribs. She braced herself for impact, trying to both simultaneously relax and tense her muscles to minimize the damage she knew he could cause her body. Gritting her teeth against the anger she felt spike within her. The anger was becoming a constant companion for the young brunette, buzzing pleasantly, simmering gently beneath the surface of her skin as if it meant to wrap her up safely. Though none had noticed its appearance besides herself. The anger had begun to grow from that night in fourth year where Fleur had led her to the room of requirement. The more she educated herself, the more it grew, and she wondered just how long it would take to burst forth. She muffled the cry of pain that wanted to escape her chapped lips as his foot connected with her stomach. Not willing to show him just how much he was hurting her because she knew her pain only ever excited them more than it did gain her any leniency. As his foot came towards her yet again, she was suddenly pulled up onto shaky feet and placed behind a body wearing the Slytherin greens. Honestly, Weasel, don't you think you're going to kill the weak little mudblood if you keep at it? Your precious Dumbledore surely wouldn't be happy to lose such a clever little servant now, would he? Draco Malfoy's words were harsh. Spat at the red-head boy. Insulting to both Hermione and Ron, yet she couldn't understand why he had interfered. The brief flash of concern and sly wink he threw at her making it clear that he had deliberately stepped in to save her any more harm. It was confusing, but she dare not question it, regardless of his reasons for protecting her. A mudblood, everything he and his family, purebloods, hated, she was grateful all the same. Her bruised stomach and battered arms especially so. Miss Granger, yet again you're at the heart of all the trouble. Detention now, the rest of you off to dinner. Professor Dolores Umbridge called as she entered the corridor, her voice sickly sweet, and Hermione found herself letting out a breath of relief. The odd woman who wore Soleil Why Pink was here at Hogwarts by order of the Ministry to keep an eye on Dumbledore and Harry, Hermione assumed. She had sensed a growing tension over the last year between the Ministry and the school's headmaster. Caught quiet discussions of outdated and barbaric views between more and more members of faculty. She could sense Harry and Ron's dislike of the woman, despite how nicely the professor meant to treat all students that weren't Omegas in the public eye. Yet despite Mybridge's outward favored treatment of all those deemed worthy, especially the purebloods, she had been kind to Hermione. Often finding an excuse to get her alone, using detentions as a cover for giving Hermione proper food, time to bathe properly, and often giving her a few hours to rest without having to constantly paw MPER to the demands of Harry and the other Alpha Gryffindor students. Once the hall had cleared, Umbridge ushered Hermione towards the stairs that led to the professor's office, a supportive arm wrapped around her waist. Gentle hands guiding her to a chair once they were safely inside behind the closed door. I'm sorry, the Ministry woman began, but Hermione couldn't bear to hear it. After so many years of constantly struggling to stay alive in a world that treated her as less than human, sorry was no longer good enough. No, she cut Umbridge off mid-sentence, her voice sharp and tired all at once, and Umbridge seemed to get it. After blinking owlishly for a few seconds in surprise at the usually quiet girl's sudden protest, realization dawned on her face and she nodded solemnly. All right, Jew, Saint, take the time you need before rejoining the others. Hermione's only response was a small flicker of a smile in appreciation. June 10, 1996, Granger residence. Hermione tried desperately to hold back the tears in her eyes as she sat at her mother's bedside. Having been called home by her father that morning because her mother had taken seriously unwell. Her mother lay in her bed, covers wrapped tightly around a shaking, sweaty body, concealing everything from the chin down. Her face was sunken, ashen-looking. Her eyes looked hollow and glassy, red-rimmed and teary as the Omega woman looked up at her. She had never seen her mother look so ill. So ill Hermione knew she wouldn't make it through the night. Beaten and bloody, sure, but ill. Never, and as much as she despised her mother, as much as her mother had never offered her an ounce of comfort in her life, Hermione couldn't help the painful pang of loss that gripped her heart as she looked at the woman. Grief already growing in her already angry, fearful and oh so weary heart. Not grief for the person her mother was, but for the person she could have been, should have been to Hermione. Had she actually cared for her child in the slightest? Hermione, the soft whispered word twisted painfully inside her as it met her ears. It was the first time her mother had said her name without any hint of disgust or anger that the 15-year-old could remember. I'm sorry for everything, she let her mother continue, silently listening despite the words coming far too little too late to make a difference to how Hermione viewed the woman. You deserved better. I deserved better, but I was a coward. I didn't fight. You must fight, Hermione. Please be brave where I failed to be. You cannot let yourself be stuck here. Yep, those words were meaningless. Hermione knew her mother only spoke them because she wouldn't be alive in the morning to face the consequences that would be on Hermione. She knew already she didn't deserve the way she was treated, no Omega did. Particularly Muggle-born Omegas who got the worst of the abuse having no magical family to protect them. She knew she deserved better and her mother's words only served to bring that by now familiar anger roaring to life with force within her. The tears that had once been grief turning to tears of anger as they finally spilled down her slim young face. Head bowing over to rest upon her mother's chest. Sobs heaving violently as she released all the pent-up emotion she had carried for so bloody long. Bony fingers threading her hair, to soothe for the first time ever. Not to harm as Omega mother and Omega child held one another in a somewhat tender embrace. Their first and last. Hours passed and Hermione could hear her mother growing weaker, the soothing hand in her hair growing still. Shallow breaths becoming sporadic and deep as her tears finally let up. She pulled back in time to see her mother take her last breath, eyes growing clouded and dim, chest stilling as death claimed her. Hermione sighed, reaching up to close her mother's eyes for despite the woman's vulgar treatment, she had been Hermione's mother and she knew she could not simply leave her to stare blankly. She deserved to be respected in death at the very least. She stood, pulling the door closed behind her as she trudged her way down the stairs in search of her father. She had no idea how he would take the news, only that she would suffer for it, and all she could pray for was that the next week passed quickly enough so she could return to Hogwarts far from her father's reach. June 18, 1996. Department of Mysteries. The room was dark when they entered, the only light in the form of the soft white glows at the end of the group of 6 students' wand and an even softer white glow from the various orbs that lined the room in rows all around them as Hermione limped along beside Harry, Ron and a few of Harry's friends. Hermione could tell they weren't alone, she could smell the strong sense of at least 5 others in the room with them, and it set the hairs at the back of her neck on end. 3 unknown alphas, a beta and an omega if she was smelling correctly. Though he hadn't ever had reason to doubt her abilities, so she supposed she was right in her assessment. Despite the 1 alpha scent, chocolate and vanilla, laced with cinnamon and the smell of old books, it seemed much more appealing and strangely soothing to her. Hermione knew they had walked into a trap and therefore an incredibly dangerous situation. "We aren't alone, this is a trap," she risked speaking up. Terrified of the consequences she'd be subjected to if anything happens, and she hadn't at least attempted to warn Harry of the danger. "Shut it, Mudblood, no one cares for your opinion," Harry hissed, turning a disgusted glare on her, and Hermione felt herself flinch, positive that if the boy who lived wasn't so concerned about finding and rescuing his godfather, Sirius Black, who was Ppo Sedley, being held captive here by he who shall not be named, then he surely would have physically reminded her of just how little he cared for her opinion. Not that she needed reminding, after 5 years of continuously trying to warn him of danger and then having to save him from said danger, she felt his lack of regard for her was pretty obvious. Not for the first time since coming to Hogwarts, Hermione seriously wished she had been killed by that troll back in first year. She hated having to serve the obnoxious, full of himself, boy who lived and his friends. Especially when said boy continuously got her into situations like this one. She was disgusted with just how willing Ginny had been to lead Umbridge into the forest in order for them all to escape the school and make their way here to the Ministry. All for some mission to save a man Hermione was pretty sure wasn't in any danger to begin with. She used to feel sorry for Ginny, being a fellow Omega, but now she only felt the seeds of disgust and pity blooming. Over the summer Harry and Ginny had discovered they were mates, and therefore Harry had taken Ginny under his protection officially. As acclaimed Omega, Ginny was untouchable to all others, and her continuous gushing and rash actions to please Harry made Hermione feel sick. "Down here," Ron Whisper yelled, pointing to a row just slightly in front of them and leading the group forward. The number 97 painted in large white lettering on the side, and Hermione gritted her teeth to stop from issuing another warning or ripping into the idiots, marching towards all those known scents that she was sure meant danger, resolutely ignoring the appealing scent that did nothing but make her feel safe even amongst a darkened room with unknown alphas. The further down aisle 97, the small group got, the stronger the scents got. She could also feel it when some of the scents began to change from their original indifferent scent to the much more demanding one of alphas trying to force another to submit. She guessed it was them the unknowns were trying to force into submission, and she could tell that both Ginny and Luna were struggling not to do exactly that. Harry, Ron and Neville didn't look to be doing too much better. She could see the sheen of sweat as it broke across their foreheads, giving tell to the struggle they were facing. Yet she didn't feel all that bothered by the demanding scent. As much as it had grown in strength, the soothing scent she could smell had also grown stronger, and for some reason she knew it was the only scent in the room that had hope of getting her to do anything. She prayed whoever the scent belonged to didn't realize that she hadn't been forced to submit by scent alone since she was 5, and she would be damned if she let it happen here. She would already be punished severely when they returned to school for some reason or other, she was sure. She quickly and quietly cast a scent nullifying charm around the small group, saying, all 5 of her fellow students relaxed slightly in relief, and Hermione almost rolled her eyes knowing that none of them would have thought about casting the spell if she hadn't have done. Hand it Veer Potter. The voice of Lucius Malfoy broke Hermione out of her thoughts, and she realized she had got so lost in her mind she hadn't even noticed when they had come to a stop, when Harry had picked his prophecy, or when the Death Eaters had appeared in front of them. Where is Sirius, Malfoy? Harry hissed, and again Hermione felt herself cringe in fear at his tone as she stood, wand raised in direction of the Death Eater that she now knew were responsible for the unknown scents around them. He is fine. It was all a trap set by the Dark Lord to get the prophecy. Now hand it over and no one gets hurt, the blonde Malfoy man stated, his tone bored and matter of fact even as he stepped forward. Hermione raised her wand higher in preparation to defend them all from the man as he approached. Her actions caused the female alpha that Hermione vaguely recognized as Bellatrix Black to step closer, her wand aimed at Hermione, her eyes narrowed in challenge. With her step closer, Hermione's eyes snapped to hers, and both witches were momentarily stunned by the immediate connection they felt. Hermione feeling as if she were unable to look away from the gorgeous yet intimidating woman in front of her. She didn't know what it was about the woman that made her feel like that, but it unsettled her. She hadn't ever felt the need to keep looking back at someone and internally panicked. No good had ever come from her looking directly in an alpha's eyes like this. She knew they saw it as her challenging their authority and did not wish for the witch's ire to be turned to her as a result. It was that thought and the internal panic that gave Hermione the strength to look away, and she knew she had to be ready to fight as hard as she could to get Harry and the others away from the Death Eaters and to safety. The next few minutes passed in an intense stare down between Harry and Lucius. Both alphas throwing barely concealed insults at each other. Lucius demanding the prophecy while Harry refused to give it to him, and suddenly before she knew it, Harry was issuing the command that she knew to heed as her cue to do something to get them out of the situation. Now, he hissed, and Hermione had the first wordless bombard a maximum, fired off at the ground in front of the Death Eaters before he was even finished issuing the command, sending the Death Eaters backwards to escape the debris created by the impact of Hermione's spell. The group of students used the distraction to their advantage, taking off back down the aisle in an attempt to get to safety. Harry passing the prophecy to Hermione with a growled, "Hide this," as they ran. She could hear when the Death Eaters recovered enough to give chase. Could hear Bellatrix's laughter as spells began to chase them. Hermione continued to aim spells at the shelves around them, causing the prophecies that lined the room to begin to fall as the shelves collapsed, adding difficulty to the Death Eaters' pursuit of them as they also had to avoid the falling shelves and orbs while they chased. Before too long the students found themselves in what Hermione recognized as a death room. A circular stone room with a dark arch containing a veil that she was sure would kill whomever fell in it. "The flows," she suggested when Harry looked at her expectantly, fully aware that it would be up to Hermione to get them out of the ministry. He nodded and took off towards the flows at the back of the room, the other students following suit. Though as Hermione went to follow she didn't get very far. 2 arms wrapped strongly around her far too thin waist. A wand thrust up almost painfully into her neck as she watched the other students all get grabbed by a Death Eater. Lucius grabbing Ginny as he came to a stop in front of Harry. Her wand removed from her hand and tucked somewhere on the other witch's person. Now that Hermione was held in these arms she realized that this woman was also the owner of the soothing scent she could smell. Earlier before she cast the charm to block out scent in the Department of Mysteries, and she found herself relaxing involuntarily against the woman's hold. Being so thoroughly surrounded by the alphas, scent had Hermione almost falling to the floor as she realized why she was reacting to the woman this way. To Bellatrix, to her mate. Her true mate, and if it weren't for Bellatrix's arms tightening round her again, Hermione knew she would have fallen. When learning about mates in her Omega Prep classes, she had briefly allowed herself to wonder just what hers would be like, imagining whomever it was coming in and taking her far from the life she was trapped in. She never allowed herself to fully hope though, and now knowing who her mate was, she was reminded exactly why she had never allowed herself to fully hope. Her mate was Bellatrix Black, and the Muggle-born girl knew fine well just what Bellatrix's view on Muggle-borns was. She despised them, believed them to be filth, to be mudbloods. Hermione knew that the knowledge that her mate was a mudblood would infuriate the Dark Witch. However, despite this certainty, she found herself leaning more of her weight into the older woman, trying to press herself as close as possible. Much more willing to risk trusting Bellatrix than she was at trusting she would survive whatever Harry and Dumbledore would throw at her upon their return to Hogwarts. Bellatrix seemed to sense that Hermione wouldn't fight her hold on her or try to flee, changing her grip from one of threat and restraint to an embrace, holding Hermione's weight effortlessly. As her wand lowered from where it was pressed against the Omega's neck. "You probably don't care much for me, Lady Black," whispering Hermione began, taking a leap of faith that despite Bellatrix's dislike of Muggle-borns, she would at least listen to Hermione enough to get her out of all this. Allowing her anger at all the injustice she had faced to give her the courage to reach out to the woman that held her. She knew the older witch was listening when she heard the gentle hum against her ear and had to suppress the shiver it evoked in her. "I need to speak to the Dark Lord," she felt Bellatrix stiffen behind her in response, and the whispered hiss of "Why?" demanded an answer. "I can't explain properly here, or why I know it's what I need to do, but I promise I mean him no harm," she could. Help the plea from slipping into her voice, as she pressed herself further back into the woman, praying that she would care enough to help her. "I don't think it matters what you do and don't mean. Filth like you." The words were hissed, and Hermione couldn't help the small whimper that escaped her lips nor the involuntary flinch that overtook her body at the older witch's words. She could tell that Bellatrix was about to decline, about to tell her she didn't care for what Hermione needed, and the realization that her only chance at salvation was about to slip past her brought tears to her eyes. "Please, I know I'm nothing. I know I'm filth, but please don't make me go back with them. Please, Lady Black." Her words were quieter than meant and came out more begging and vulnerable than she had ever meant to be with anyone. She silently cursed herself as the tears spilled down her face. Suddenly feeling herself being turned around by the older witch, Hermione averted her gaze, not at all willing to look the woman in the eye. Feeling unworthy in every sense of the word, her chin was grasped lightly, her head forced back up gently as she was made to meet the witch's scrutinizing stare. He didn't think she had ever seen someone look at her so intensely, nor had anyone looked at her with such a devastating mix of emotions before. Longing, love, lust, disgust, suspicion, all playing across the gorgeous face in front of her. Though she supposed the woman must have seen something in her face that made her change her mind. Her features softening as gentle hands wiped the tears from Hermione's cheeks, and the move was so tender, so much kinder than anything she had ever before been offered, that it caused fresh tears to spill, dampening her cheeks once again. "All right, hush now, I'll take you," the witch whispered tenderly, bringing Hermione back into her body, tucking her face into her neck so the Omega could take comfort in her scent. "Once we've got the prophecy, I'll take you back with me, little one." "I have it," Hermione whispered back, and at Bellatrix's raised eyebrow she continued, "The prophecy, I have it. It's in my left hoodie pocket, spelled to protect it from harm." "Shush," explained, and let Bellatrix reach into her pocket to check. The older witch smiled slightly, more an upturn of the corner of her mouth than anything, but it was enough to let Hermione know she was pleased. Before any more could be said, the sound of several pops echoed around the room, and both witches found themselves tuning back into the conversation around them just in time to see Dumbledore and the Order of the Phoenix arrive. Hermione found herself flipped back around and back in a restraining grip once again as the Dark Witch raised her wand on her neck. "Play along," was whispered in Ear as the older witch gently nuzzled her quickly before firming her grip around Hermione. Subtly press the dark mark on my arm and push some of your magic into it. It was a command, not a request. And Hermione didn't think twice about doing as she was told to. She brought her hands up to the witch's arm as if she were gripping it in an attempt to get free and let two of her fingers press against the mark. Channeling her magic into her hands, she pushed her magic outwards, feeling her alpha shiver slightly behind her as she did so. Good, that's enough, the words were purred, much gentler th. And the previous command, and Hermione felt herself preen proudly at the praise. Without warning, Hermione found herself spun, the elder witch spinning with her as Bellatrix sent a flurry of spells at th. Order members whom had now began to attack the Death Eaters. She couldn't help but be highly impressed with Bellatrix's sheer power and skill as the Dark Witch effortlessly protected both herself and Hermione, returning fire much quicker than her opponents, all while holding Hermione close with one hand. She could feel the magical energy in the air around her as Bellatrix fought, and she knew the feeling was one that if she wasn't careful she could grow addicted to. She focused herself on the fight and the magic all around her, allowing her senses to expand. She could feel the spells as they formed around her, and it was this concentration that allowed her to sense the hex aimed at Bellatrix's back by an unknown Order member. She didn't really think about her next actions, nor did she allow herself to dwell on just how quickly she had jumped to Bellatrix's defense, but she found herself flinging up a strong shield around the Dark Witch seconds before the spell would have hit her. Hermione hissed when she felt the spell bounce of her shield, but any discomfort was forgotten about when she felt the Dark Witch's arm tighten around her in support. For such a simple gesture it was comforting, and made Hermione feel so much better about the trust she had placed in the older witch. They continued like that, Bellatrix fighting and Hermione throwing up shield after shield to stop the many X's and spells thrown at the Dark Witch. At some point the atmosphere changed, and Hermione couldn't help the whimper of fear that escaped her lips when the strongest dominating scent of alpha she had ever smelt filled the room, causing fear and sheer terror to course through every fiber of the young witch's body, which had began shaking and trembling uncontrollably. Her mind flashing back to times where she was left completely and utterly broken after an attack by her father or Harry or even Dumbledore. So lost in her own memories she didn't notice when Bellatrix stopped fighting in concern, or did she notice when the Dark Lord had ordered Bellatrix to take the clearly distraught witch back to base and take care of her, and by the time Bellatrix had got her to the flow in order to get her out of the ministry, her entire world had gone dark as unconsciousness claimed her. Her body and mind shutting down without permission in an effort to protect herself from reliving any more of those horrific memories. June 18, 1996. Department of Mysteries, Bellatrix's POV. Standing in the darkened halls of the Ministry, Bellatrix could feel a quiet buzz of anticipation ripple through the magic in the air around her. This was set to be a simple task for her lord. They were to go in, get the prophecy from the Potter boy, and get out. Easy, simple. He had predicted that the Potter boy would show up with his usual crowd of thick-headed followers. All the little betas wanting recognition and all his fawning little omegas, desperate to fill his bed. It made her sick to watch the way Wizarding Bridge Attain had held so firmly to such archaic beliefs. Alphas were stronger in a sense that she could agree upon to an extent, because when they are stripped down to their base instincts, alphas are notoriously more dominant. However, the belief that omegas were little more than slaves sickened her. Though nothing sickened her more than the way the majority of omegas seemed to enjoy the servitude. The majority of Wizarding Britain were little better than the Muggles and their views on their primal side. Her lord believed the only way to eradicate such a belief was to win this war, and she was more than inclined to agree with him. Albus Dumbledore and his cronies were nothing more than archaic barbarians, and Bellatrix couldn't wait to see them crushed. For far too long she had watched Megas being enslaved and Alphas be viewed as lords, where not all were worthy of such a title. The Potter boy being one such unworthy of his popularity and following. It was a pity she had been ordered not to harm the boy. He was the prophesied savior from the Dark Lord, and therefore their lord had reserved the right to put an end to Harry Potter's overprivileged existence. Though just because he was off limits didn't mean that Bellatrix would sit idle. No, she had her eyes set on the rest of his following for now. If she could take out a few of them, all the better in her eyes. The less Simple-minded filth to follow the boy who should have died the better in her mind. She took a deep breath, scenting the air around her as she sensed the group of students move toward her. She could hear their hushed whispers as they approached, though she was unable to make out their words. 3 Omegas, a Beta and 2 young Alphas, we should be able to overpower them by scent alone, she whispered. Red trying desperately to hold in the cackle that threatened to appear at just how easy these students were going to be. She smiled widely in anticipation as she heard her fellow Death Eaters chuckle their agreement quietly from their hiding places around her. She refocused herself, eyes trained on the aisle in front of her that she knew they would appear in, though she couldn't help the slight fusion she felt at the strength of one of the Omega scents as the youngsters grew closer. It was appealing in a way no scent had ever been to the Dark Witch, and she knew it was a scent she would have to investigate a little further. When the group of students came into view, it took every bit of self-control she had not to start tormenting them immediately. Bellatrix bit her lip, trying to stop the growl of distaste she felt giving away their position in the shadows. We aren't alone, this is a trap, she heard one of the Omegas whisper, and the sight of her bruised face and unkempt clothes said another wave of distaste to travel through Bellatrix as she watched the Potter boy hiss at the girl. This girl was the one that smelt very appealing, she noted as she watched them approach. Now a little less eager to reveal herself. She didn't know why the girl's scent drew her in so much, and she didn't think she was willing to find out. Force them to submit now, make it easier for us, Dolohov. The only Beta with them tonight whispered as he kept closer to Bellatrix. Without further discussion, she focused her will upon the approaching students, sending out wave after wave of her pheromones, trying to get them to submit. She could smell her colleagues doing the same and watched with some satisfaction as the students in front of her began to struggle. Though she noted with some annoyance the little Omega who had spoken previously didn't appear all that fazed by the scents around her, she narrowed her eyes. Focusing upon the girl, she watched as the Omega subtly flicked her wand in what Bellatrix recognized as the pattern to cast a scent nullifying charm. She growled quietly. Clever little Omega, she whispered, stopping her efforts to get the group to submit. She watched as the Potter boy retrieved his prophecy and continued to watch as Lucius stepped out to address him, though she kept her eyes trained on the Omega girl, getting the impression that this girl was quite clever and would be the one to give them the most trouble. Though when the girl raised her wand at Lucius, she felt her inner alpha rile up at the open challenge being presented in front of her. Especially when the girl pointed her wand at a member of Bellatrix's family. She may not particularly like Lucius, thinking him arrogant, but he was still her youngest sister's alpha, a man that Narcissa loved. Arlie, and Bellatrix wouldn't let harm come to him. Meeting the girl's challenge, she felt herself step forward, eyes narrowed as she also raised her wand, pointing it at the young witch in front of her. Though when the girl's eyes snapped to hers, meeting her gaze, Bellatrix was stunned. The reason the girl's scent was so appealing suddenly made sense as she recognized that this girl was hers, their bond snapping in place quickly. Confirming her thoughts, she watched as a myriad of emotions flashed in the girl's eyes and was more than concerned when her Omega's eyes settled on a mix between terrified and resigned acceptance before the girl looked down and away from her in a clear display of submission. Bellatrix frowned. She didn't like the idea that her mate was afraid to continue to meet her gaze. It concerned her and infuriated her all at once. She couldn't allow herself to be distracted though. The girl was one of Dumbledore's minions, she was Potter's friend, a thought that had her lip curling in fury. She wasn't worthy of being Bellatrix's, or she wouldn't be following along beside the Potter boy, she told herself. Not wanting to be mated to a girl that would follow such barbaric views. Fully believing that the girl was following Potter willingly with how the girl had stepped forward to protect him. Now, the Potter boy's hissed words caught her attention as he turned expectantly to the little Omega, and again Bellatrix saw a flash of fear in her eyes when he spoke before the girl turned and began firing upon Bellatrix and the other Death Eaters, forcing them backwards momentarily as the students began to flee. Bellatrix was loath to admit the girl was powerful, her spell strong enough to completely shatter the ground at all the Death Eaters' feet, sending debris everywhere. She cackled as she stood, beginning to chase after them, now slightly more eager to get her hands on the girl for her little display of defiance. She was a black after all, and no black would ever back down from a challenge. Though she doubted the girl was deliberately challenging her. She laughed gleefully even as she dodged shelf after shelf of falling prophecies, her colleagues not far behind as they finally managed to catch up with Potter and his friends in the death room. Using her dark mist form, Bellatrix swooped down and grabbed the tiny Omega girl about the waist, pulling her in against her body tightly as she pressed her wand against the girl's throat. She took the girl's wand quickly, noting in the back of her mind that the girl's wand was proof they were soulmates, hers being a 1.2 3/4 inch walnut wand with a dragon heartstring core. The girl's was identical, with the only exception being her wand length that was 2 inches shorter than Bellatrix's. She tucked it into her corset. As she tightened her grip on the girl, afraid that the girl would try and run or fight. Though by the way the girl's body was leaning further and further into her and relaxing against her, the girl wasn't going to try and run. Beatrix changed her grip slightly, lowering her wand to wrap her arm around the girl's waist in an embrace while her other hand came up to rest against the girl's forehead, holding her closely. She tried to come up with something to say to test out whether or not the girl was actually okay with her life, happy with her place in the wizarding world, wanting to get a sense of whether or not she could take the girl and turn her beliefs around. But before she got the chance, the girl spoke. Her words freezing the Dark Witch's heart. "You probably don't care for me much, Lady B. Lack." All she could do was hum quietly in the girl's ear, wanting her to go on but not particularly okay with hearing that the girl thought she didn't want her. Expecting reasons as to why the girl believed Bellatrix didn't want her. The girl's next words caused Bellatrix to tense in suspicion. "I need to speak to the Dark Lord." Her word choice in addressing the man was curious. She hadn't ever heard anyone on the apparent light side address him as such before, but she was suspicious about the girl's intentions. Had she been tasked to try and assassinate Bellatrix's lord? Preen information out of him? If so, she wouldn't let that happen. "Why?" she hissed into the girl's ear, keeping her voice low enough that no one else would overhear them. "I can't explain properly here, or why I know it's had I need to do, but I promise I mean him no harm," the girl replied, and again Bellatrix felt confusion at her answer. Why couldn't the girl tell her? What was stopping her? "I don't think it matters what you do and don't mean. Filth like you," she spat, trying to not let on just how much the girl in her arms was affecting her, needing to remind both herself and the girl that they were on opposing sides of this war. That she couldn't let their bond interfere with her mission. Feeling the girl tense up completely and hearing her whimper, though, had Bellatrix tightening her grip on the girl involuntarily. Her inner alpha rebelling against her Omega's distress. "Please. I know I'm nothing. I know I'm filth, but please don't make me go back with them. Please, Lady Black." The girl's words were pleading, and the raw emotion in her voice caused the Dark Witch to pause. Something wasn't right with this, she knew. Her Omega shouldn't be sounding so fearful to stay with the people she chose to stay with. But she knew she couldn't ignore her Omega's distress now. Their connection was already a strong one, had been from the moment it had formed, and she knew it would be painful for them both if she were to ignore the girl's distress. She flipped the girl around, grasping her chin gently and forcing her Omega to meet her eyes, and the pain she saw hidden in the depths of those light brown orbs was out to cause her heart to clench painfully, fierce anger gripping her bones as she realized for the first time just how terrified and beaten her Omega was. There was no way she was a willing bystander of Albus. No way she was happy with her lot in life if she were standing here begging the darkest witch alive to take her to the supposed most evil man to have lived rather than remain here with her friends. With that understanding, she felt herself readying to fight for the Omega in front of her, now certain that there was indeed a chance the girl would switch sides once they got her away from here. "All right. Hush now. I'll take you," she found herself whispering, bringing her Omega into a tight embrace, tucking her head into her neck beside her scent gland, hoping it'll bring the Omega me comfort, because as much as she was the darkest witch alive, she wasn't heartless, especially when it came to those she considered hers. "Once we have the prophecy, I'll take you back with me, little one," she murmured, unable to help the term of endearment slipping into her words at the end. There was something about having her Omega cling to her so tightly that melted Bellatrix's usual ability to be harsh and unforgiving. "I have it," the girl whispered, and Bellatrix couldn't help but raise a curious eyebrow at her, prompting the girl to explain what she had. If she had the prophecy and was willing to give it over, then things would be so much easier on all the Death Eaters. The prophecy, I have it. It's in my left hoodie pocket, spelled to protect it from harm, she explained and allowed the Dark Witch to reach into her pocket. Bellatrix pulled the prophecy out, inspecting it for any damage, allowing her lip to curl in approval as she replaced it back in the young witch's pocket. Knowing that it would please her lord that she was able to bring both her mate and the prophecy back to the manor unharmed. How foolish was Potter to give such a valuable item to a witch that was clearly unhappy with her lot in life. Fuck, Bellatrix thought as she heard the various pops of apparition that indicated that Dumbledore and his order had appeared, knowing things could get messy and she might not be able to escape with the witch's plan. Bellatrix flipped the girl back around, raising her wand to the girl's neck, hoping that if she was seen as an unwilling captive of the Dark Witch then she wouldn't come to harm if Bellatrix couldn't get her out. Play along, she whispered, nuzzling her mate gently in reassurance when she felt the girl tense again, willing the girl to understand that she wasn't actually in danger from Bellatrix. Realizing that they may need help to get out, Bellatrix firmed her voice before speaking, subtly press the dark mark on my arm and push some of your magic into it, she commanded and praised Merlin that the girl seemed to react almost instantly to her order as she brought her arms up to grip Bellatrix's, pressing her fingers into the Dark Witch's mark. From there she felt herself go into full battle mode, forcing the pleasant shivers caused by the Omega's magic down and focusing on the fight at hand. Things progressed quite quickly as the Order Mem. Seemed to target her as the biggest threat, yet Bellatrix was more than pleasantly surprised when the little Omega started throwing up shields around them almost instinctively to protect their back. While she focused on fighting the Order members in front of her, not for a second letting go of her mate. Determined to get the girl out of the Ministry and far from Albus Dumbledore's reach. When her lord appeared, she almost gagged at how quickly Albus pumped out his most dominating pheromones, her lord retaliating with the same, causing the air to become thick with the scent of their anger. He could feel her girl begin to shake in her arms and stopped fighting, only holding a shield around them both to protect them as she focused on her mate. The girl's eyes were wide, panicked and clouded with absolute terror. There was no recognition in the little Omega's eyes as Bellatrix tried to get her to talk, and she knew all too well what was happening. Her Omega was stuck in some sort of Florida's back and couldn't fight through it in her current situation. Go Bellatrix, take care of her. Her lord's voice cut through her inner panic at seeing her mate in such a state, and she gave him grateful smile and nod as she moved forward, scooping her girl into her arms and holding her protectively as she made her way to the flows. By the time she got there, the girl had gone limp. Entering Malfoy Manor, Bellatrix was relieved to see her sister checking over Lucius, glad that he made it back in one piece. Though she was not expecting her sister to take one look at the girl in her arms and stride forward, pulling Bellatrix's mate into her own arms and hissing at Bellatrix protectively. What is going on here? Why do you have the Granger girl? Bella, she's just a child, Narcissa hissed, glaring at her sister while cradling the young witch in her arms. I'm not going to hurt her, sissy. She is my mate, the Dark Witch replied, looking more than a little offended as she cautiously got closer to her sister and young mate. Wanting to be close but also smart enough to know when an Omega mother was being protective of a cub, even if the girl wasn't hers, it was obvious Narcissa cared deeply for the girl. What do you know, sissy? She asked carefully, eyeing her sister for any signs of aggression as she continued her slow approach. The girl is adopted by Muggles who treat her horrifically. I do not know more other than that she is treated poorly by the Potter boy and his friends. I have had Draco watching over her, protecting her where he can without bringing attention to himself. He says he is powerful beyond anyone in their year group and the majority of the older students. However, Dumbledore has had her serving Potter from her very first day. I've been keeping an eye on her from the very first day she stepped into the platform where I saw her Muggle father threaten the girl about remembering her place, Narcissa whispered, stroking a delicate hand down the girl's bruised and dirtied cheeks. There is no knowledge of her birth parents? Bellatrix asked, her anger at the state of her mate roaring to life once again. No, though we know that as she is your mate she cannot be Muggle-born as she believes she is. The family curse would not allow for otherwise, her sister responded, before reluctantly allowing Bellatrix to retake her Omega into her own arms. Bellatrix frowned as she held the girl closer. If the girl was pureblood, which she must be for her to be mated to her, the family curse placed upon the blacks by a blood purity fanatic centuries ago, meaning that all blah CKs would only find their mates in other pureblood families. Then who was the girl's parents? And why was she left defenseless in the Muggle world? It didn't make sense to Bellatrix. All the purebloods she knew doted on their children, adored them, and did all they could to protect them. It was like a switch in their personalities as soon as they had a child. She had watched it with her sister, and Lucius had seen the devastation losing a child caused in a mother, her friend being prime example. Having her child murdered had devastated Bellatrix's friend and hardened her heart beyond recognition. Take her to your room, Bellatrix. I'll be up shortly to help tend her wounds, Narcissa instructed her gently, patting her shoulder in comfort, clearly seeing the swirl of emotion in the dark witch's eyes. Bellatrix nodded, tightening her grip on the girl. She wanted more than ever for the little Omega to wake up. She had so many questions and knew the girl in front of her would be the only one with the ability to answer them. Come now, little mate, let us take care of you. We must talk when you awaken, she whispered gently as she guided herself and the girl out of the room and towards the stairs. June 19, 1996, Malfoy Manor, Bellatrix's POV. Looking down upon the small Omega girl that lay in her arms, Bellatrix couldn't help but worry. Her Omega wouldn't let her not hold her close. Whenever Bellatrix wasn't beside her, the girl had been crying and whimpering in her sleep, something that tugged almost painfully at the dark witch's heart. The way both her sisters were continuously glancing at one another with concerned expressions did nothing to alleviate the dark witch's worries as the two worked quickly and efficiently on healing her little mate's body. She had known her Omega was NT in a great way when she had first taken hold of the girl, though she hadn't realized at the time just how bad a condition her mate was in until now. She had been far too caught up in the battle. Determined to cause as much harm as she could in an attempt to disrupt Dumblefuck and his merry band of manipulators, to realize that her mate was merely a few blows short of near death, and her Defa NSIVE shield had drained her of the very little energy she had. Though she hoped her mate would not take too long to recover, as the Dark Lord had dropped by to request their presence as soon as her Omega was up and about again. How bad? She asked, pinning them with her eyes as both her sisters finally pulled their magic from the girl. Deciding to cut to the chase, not in the mood in the slights. To have them sugarcoat anything when it came to her mate. She'll be fine. She will need a few days to heal properly and for her magical core to recharge, but we've managed to heal all dangerous wounds she had, Andromeda replied curtly. Sensing her sister's impatience, feeling as if letting Bella know her mate was safe may lessen the blow at just how dangerously close the girl had been to dying. What were her wounds, sister? The Dark Witch hissed, sensing her sister's reluctance to divulge. Gulping a little, Narcissa decided to take the lead, having more experience with her eldest sister and being the only one out the two of the younger blacks that Bellatrix was not mad at. She had 13 fractured bones, 2 broken fingers and a broken foot. She had a variety of internal bruises, one particularly nasty one on her torso from what appears to be a foot, and she is severely malnourished. We also found evidence of prolonged curse exposure. The tremor she has makes me believe the Cruciatus was a particular common experience for her, Narcissa finished, falling to her knees as the smell of an angry alpha grew in the air around them, forcing both Andromeda and Narcissa to show their submission to their eldest sister. Bella, please, Andromeda choked out as both younger blacks struggled to keep calm under the pressure around them. Though it wasn't her sister's begging that snapped the Dark Witch out of her boiling fury at finding out just how badly her Omega had been harmed. It was the girl herself who suddenly tensed, her eyes shooting open as she whimpered in terror, the smell of her alpha being so angry, pulling her from her unconscious state. Survival instinct kicking in and taking precedent over any injuries she hadn't been healed completely of. Bellatrix snapped her head down in the direction of her mate, her eyes widening in horror when she realized that her current state was terrifying her Omega. Her girl's eyes glazed over in fear as she strained to get herself as far away from the aggravated alpha as she possibly could. After all, nothing good ever came from being so close to an angry alpha. She could tell the girl was searching for her wand as she tried to extract herself from Bellatrix's arms, and the usually self-assured witch froze in confusion before glancing at her sisters for help. Completely unsure how to approach calming her mate down without completely dominating her. Let her go, Bella. She won't calm unless she feels a little more in control. Show her that you aren't going to force her into anything, Andromeda offered, and although Bellatrix really did not want to let go of her mate, the girl who had almost died ensuring Bellatrix's back was protected, she decided that her Omega sisters probably knew best what would work. Within seconds of Bellatrix releasing the girl, she had sprung off the bed and backed herself into the furthest corner of the room, silently casting Accio to call her wand to her hand, and despite the obvious worrying situation they were in, Bellatrix couldn't help but be impressed with her mate's skill level even as the girl's wand came up, aimed at her. Before you approach her slowly, rein in your pheromones, they rather aggressive right now, and as you approach talk to her, explain what's happening, Narcissa added, and Bellatrix only paused in her silent appraisal of the girl long enough to nod at her sisters before her eyes found the girl's, wanting the eye contact with her mate. Surprisingly enough, for a witch who took pleasure often in reducing others to such a terrified state, looking into the fearful chocolate orbs of her Omega helped Bellatrix regain control of her anger, unable to find any joy in knowing her mate was reacting so fearfully to her, and she began pumping out soothing pheromones to help her mate calm down. Though she ensured to keep them light in the air so her mate wouldn't feel as if Bellatrix was trying to force her to calm down. Approaching slowly, Bellatrix made sure she kept her hands out in front of her in a gesture of peace, seeing her mate constantly flick her eyes between Bella's own and the Dark Witch's hands. Which for the first time in her life Bellatrix was glad to not have her own wand in her hand, certain that her little witch would see that as a threat in her current state. "It's all right, sweet girl, I won't harm you, I give you my word," the Dark Witch began, slowing her steps as her mate flinched back when Bellatrix didn't stop moving forward. "Why?" the young witch whispered, her eyes doubtful, but Bellatrix could clearly see just how much the change in pace and her voice was calming her girl. "Because you're mine, my mate, my Omega, and I'd rather die than allow harm to come to what is mine, so please take a breath and calm down for me," Bella replied honestly, keeping her tone quiet and gentle but no less truthful. Smiling softly in a way she hadn't done since she was a child when she saw the relief flash across her mate's face, the girl's posture relaxing slightly, wand lowering, and Bellatrix took the opportunity to get rid of the space between them, pressing her body against the younger girl's and pressing her against the wall. "You feel it though, don't you, sweet girl? You know you're mine," Bellatrix continued speaking, marveling at how much those words seemed to relax her mate as she brought her hands up to the girl, one gripping possessively at the brunette's hip while the other threaded through the girl's thick curly locks, gripping gently as she guided the girl's head to the side, exposing her throat. "Use your words, sweet girl," Bella murmured, pressing a kiss to her mate's pulse point, smirking victoriously as she felt Hermione shiver and relax further into her, the girl's hands coming up to grip the front of the Dark Witch's dress. "Yes, Alpha," was Bella's whispered reply, and her smirk grew, though not for a second did she allow her own sense of victory at the title pull her away from her mate, merely taking a gentle grip of the girl's pulse point with her teeth, biting lightly. Their proximity was appearing to help her mate keep her calm and was rather quite pleasurable for Bella too. She hadn't ever considered that holding her mate, having her mate relaxing against her could feel so good, especially when her mate tilted her head herself, further exposing her neck to the older witch. "Good girl," Bella whispered, wreathen a little proud of how quickly she had calmed her mate and how accepting her mate was of Bellatrix's rather possessive behavior, which filled the Dark Witch with hope. She was known for her possessive nature. All alphas could get possessive and territorial, but the blacks were renowned for their extreme possessive nature, their inherent dislike and aggression towards anyone that was even remotely a threat to their possessions, and their absolute need to claim and dominate when their mates are threatened or touched by anyone else. She knew Hermione would need to be strong and patient when it came to those scenarios, and the girl's easy acceptance to a tamer version of how bad Bella could get had her hoping the girl would cope with her rather well. Pulling back enough to get a proper look at the girl, Bella waited patiently for now much calmer, warmer-looking chocolate orbs to meet her own dark eyes before speaking again. Smiling gently at the girl, "Now that you're calmer, sweet girl, we have a few things to talk about together. The Dark Lord is intrigued by your request to speak with him, as am I. We also have to have a conversation about your parentage. What would you rather do first?" Bellatrix tilted her head to the side, raising an eyebrow at the clear sign of confusion on Hermione's face as the girl looked at her in awe. You're giving me a choice. The brunette whispered, completely unaware of the heartache such innocent words caused the three other occupants of the room, Narcissa and Andromeda having stayed to observe and be on hand should their sister need assistance. You will always have a choice, Hermione. You may be my Omega, but while I expect a certain degree of respect and submission from you, we are equal, sweet girl. I will never treat you as any less. Nor will I allow others to treat you any less. Again the Dark Witch found herself answering honestly, her eyes blazing with conviction as her mate studied her face, presumably for any trace of deception in Bellatrix's words. She wouldn't find any, for Bellatrix knew she was being nothing but honest with her young mate. She saw no reason to lie to the girl who had clearly known much deception and harm in her short years. Hermione smiled slightly, the first smile Bellatrix had seen cross the girl's delicate features, and it warmed her heart slightly. Okay, I want to tell you why thing, but I can't relive it again and again, so can we wait until we are with the Dark Lord, please? She whispered, her voice a little more sure than it had been before. Bellatrix smiled and nodded her head. Of course. Just let my sisters look you over first and then I will take you to him, the Dark Witch replied, finally stepping back from the girl and guiding her over to sit on the edge of the bed they had been in previously. As Hermione walked through the grand double doors into the room Narcissa had called the drawing room, she pressed herself further into Bellatrix as many competing alpha scents met her nose. Putting the young witch on edge, she tightened her grip on her wand and Bellatrix's skirt, wishing she could simply curl herself back around the fierce woman and stay there. She felt safe in Bellatrix Black's arms, as if no one and nothing could ever harm her again, and it was a feeling she wished she could hold on to for eternity. She knew it was foolish to indulge in such thinking. Believing anyone would keep her safe had always gotten her hurt in the past, but knowing Bellatrix was her mate made Hermione's want to believe her that much stronger. Looking around the room, Hermione had to bite her cheek to stop herself from showing any outward sign of her terror at the many faces all peering at her. Many sneering or leering at her, many more studying her as if she were a laboratory experiment. Their gazes made her uncomfortable, and she knew that if it weren't for the way her mate's arm tightened around her waist, drawing her against the older witch that much close, she would have most probably made a run for it, especially when she realized that many of the alphas were directing their pheromones at her, trying to get her to submit, and while it would not have the intended effect on her, it still made her feel very unsafe, to the point she barely managed to conceal her whimper from escaping too loudly. Hush, I've got you, Bellatrix whispered, being the only one close enough to hear it and determining just how upset all the fools were making her mate. It was putting Bellatrix on edge, and she could feel her temper rising. A temper she was determined to fig. For now, to spare her little mate the fright she would surely experience. Everyone bar those that require to be here for this clear out now. You should all be ashamed of yourself, a harsh voice called out from behind the brunette, and Hermione felt herself tense even further, highly relieved when Bellatrix drew her into a hug, allowing Hermione to tuck her nose into the Dark Witch's neck at her scent gland, and if anyone in the room balked at seeing the usually aggressive and brash older witch so caring and soft, they weren't brave enough to comment. The Dark Lord sounded furious. Surely he wouldn't have much patience for her. She was a mudblood after all. Hermione's own thoughts began to race away from her. Ah, Bellatrix, your Omega is awake at last, I see, a much calmer voice spoke up once the room had emptied. Yes, my lord. She woke a short time ago and requested we all spoke together, as she did not want to have to repeat the story more than once, Bellatrix replied, bowing her head briefly in respect. Not releasing the girl from her arms yet, sensing that she needed a few minutes more to calm herself. Understandable. And what were the extent of her injuries? As Bellatrix, Narcissa, Andromeda and the Dark Lord discussed her injuries, Hermione took the opportunity to take in deep breaths of her alpha's scent, calming herself down and refocusing her brain. Now she had a moment to think. She had woken up terrified and being calmed by Bellatrix, having the older witch pin her to the wall, pressed so tightly against her, having the witch's mouth on her neck had felt wonderful. And as much as it calmed her, it did nothing to help her think, so she was grateful for the few moments she had been granted by the conversation around her. When she was ready, slipping her mind set back into a calm Confident indifference. Hermione squeezed Bellatrix gently to get her attention and smiled a little when the Dark Witch's eyes automatically landed on hers. "Are you all right to talk now, sweet girl?" Bellatrix whispered, unable to hide or filter the affection she felt already for her little mate as she gently brushed a stray lock of brown behind the girl's ear. Hermione nodded, unable to respond verbally as she took in the soft look of adoration on the fierce witch's face. It was a look she had never had directed at her in her life, and so it startled her somewhat. Reinforcing that maybe she had in fact made the right decision in giving herself so easily to the Dark Lord's best or worst, depending on what side of the war you were on, Lieutenant. "All right, when you're ready," the Dark Witch replied, her voice a little louder than before as she turned Hermione round to face the Dark Lord, keeping her arms wrapped loosely around the girl for various reasons. Mainly because she wasn't at all keen to have her little mate away from her arms, and also as much as she knew deep down it wouldn't happen, but there was the slim chance that this was all a setup and Hermione would make an attempt on her lord's life. Which she couldn't allow. "My full name is Hermione Jean Granger, sir. I was raised by Muggles, though I have no idea who my real parents are because I was adopted by John and Jean Granger when I was 2 weeks old from a Muggle orphanage in London," the brunette began, her voice void of any and all emotion, and Bellatrix watched as her lord seemed to sit up a little straighter to listen to the girl. "So what would a Muggle born like you, Harry Potter's mudblood, want with an audience with me, Miss Granger?" the dark man asked, his voice lacking the usual callousness and disinterest he usually possessed. No one in the room failed to notice the girl flinch at his words, the scent of a distressed omega rising subtly around them. "I need it out, sir. I'm so tired of never being enough there. All my life I've been taught I am worth little more than an alpha's slave and bed warmer. Beaten till I cannot move and punished for the slightest things that truly do not inherit punishing. I believed that's just how the world was, how my life was to be, until the day I got my Hogwarts letter and met Professor McGonagall. She was the first alpha ever to show me any hint of kinness. And I was beyond excited at what I believed was a fresh start for me, a chance for equality and justice far from my Muggle father's reach. I was devastated when the reality of what I was walking into presented itself, and no matter how hard I tried to prove I was worth something more than my status, than my dynamic, it just gave Dumbledore more and more reason to target me, to use me, and how better to do so than have me serve Harry." The brunette didn't even try to hide the sneer and utter contempt in her voice when she mentioned Hogwarts headmaster and the golden boy of the light side. She glanced up for the first time, meeting the dark man's gaze as she kept her eyes and expression completely open and honest, willing the Dark Lord to allow her to keep speaking before interrupting. His small nod of encouragement and surprisingly understanding eyes was all the permission Hermione needed to continue. "In my 4th year I met a Beauxbaxton student. She is an alpha. She saved me from a beating I had run from. My body was too weak at the time to survive if I had stayed a moment longer. She took me to the room of requirement, healed me, gave me food, and told me that the way I was treated is barbaric. That Britain is stuck in the Dark Ages and is the only country she knows that still clings to such disgusting views, and I could do nothing but cry in relief that finally someone other than I had spoken out about the injustice around me. She told me to use the room of requirement whenever I could, to educate myself in the same magical knowledge the Alpha and Beta students had access to. So I did. I became the best at everything, and grudgingly Dumbledore named me the brightest witch of my age. But such a title means nothing in our world when its bearer is a Muggle-born Omega girl. This year, a few days ago in fact, my Muggle mother, an Omega, passed away. Her dying words to me were that she didn't want me to make the same mistakes she did. She wanted me to fight for a better world. A world where Muggle-born Omegas didn't have to live in fear. Where we were valued and cared about as any other member of this society, because despite our status we have just as much to offer. I had despised my mother until that moment. I had thought her weak, unworthy of the title. After all, Omega or not, what mother lets their maid beat a defenseless 4-year-old, or throw her 8-year-old down steps, locking her in a basement for days till she is near death? What mother willingly joins the abuse? If I were her, I certainly would not have allowed my child to suffer in such a way. Hermione spat, unwilling to allow just how much her mother had hurt her to show. She couldn't afford to fall apart now, not when for the first time in her life she felt like she was truly being heard. The Dark Lord's surprisingly soft expression. The reassuring, strong embrace of her alpha and the soothing scent of every member of the room giving her the strength to keep pushing through in what she needed to say. I sat with her. Despite the many ways she failed me as my mother, I held her until she took her last breath, and as I left my father's home I vowed that I would do all I could to ensure that when I eventually have my own daughter she does not come into a world that would rather see her bow down than thrive. I didn't know how I was going to do such a thing. I believed I was alone in how badly I wanted to see the current world we live in fall. That was until I saw Bellatrix in the ministry. When I knew she was my alpha, I knew I had two choices. To fight her and return to the life I despise. Or put my faith in her and by proxy you, sir. I chose to trust her. To trust you, and no matter what you decide I will stand by that decision. Bellatrix is my alpha, I am her omega, and I will not betray her. All I am hoping for is a chance to prove my worth, to fight for something important. Something that would mean my children never have to fear the way I have had to do my whole life. The brunette finished, taking a deep breath and returning her gaze to meet the Dark Lord's, and the look of surprise and pride in his eyes warmed her a little. For a man that she had been taught to fear, he did not at all appear in this moment as the sadistic evil he was painted to be. Firstly, Ms. Granger, thank you for the trust you have placed in me. It isn't every day one so young chooses to go against a verdict. They have been taught to fight for something better. Secondly, and please do not take this as an insult, but as much as I want to believe you have told me the truth, as much as I do in fact believe it, it would not do for me to be so quick to accept a story. Is there any way you can back up your words? His voice was soft, the gentlest Bellatrix and the other occupants of the room had ever heard it, and the Dark Witch couldn't find it in herself to be annoyed by his disbelief of her mate. Anyone could see the girl was being honest, could detect her pain and anguish in her scent, but she knew a man that Dumbledore had tried to kill permanently numerous times. He really could afford to act carelessly. I understand, sir. I would be a little disappointed if a man as powerful as you took everything at face value. The brunette, surprising everyone in the room, chuckled gently before she continued. The only way I can think to prove my words is by allowing you into my mind. I will lower my shields and let you look at anything you want to, because in all honesty I really do not have anything to hide, she replied, smiling a little at him in understanding. She didn't want him to feel like he was asking too much of her. I am grateful you would allow me to do such a thing, and I will accept the offer. However, I will not enter your mind. I will have Bellatrix and Narcissa do so later in private, young one. If they report back that you are as genuine as you appear to be, then I will offer you a position in my ranks, personally overseeing your training. Is that acceptable to you? He replied, ignoring the surprised and bewildered looks that appeared on his followers' faces. He was more than aware he never showed such interest in their training. But something about this girl, a girl, like him who had known such harsh treatment in the Muggle world and then the magical world, he could feel her potential, the raw strength of her magic, and he wished to nourish her as best he could. Thank you, sir, Hermione whispered, suddenly feeling a little overwhelmed with the kindness he was showing her. Completely unused to such a thing. It's no issue, Ms. Granger. When you are ready, have Bellatrix help you with a DNA test as well. Now I shall wish you a good evening, he dismissed kindly, seeing the clear exhaustion in the girl's eyes even as she fought it. He hadn't realized it was so long. Taean knew the young girl would need all the rest she could get. She was severely malnourished and underweight, and he quietly hoped that Bellatrix would make the girl eat plenty in the coming days. He turned and apparated on the spot, leaving the manor to oversee other matters, leaving behind shocked followers and a girl who now knew that she had in fact made the right decision as she was pulled against her alpha tightly and led out of the room. The breeze blew gently against Hermione's exposed flesh, her arms and neck feeling rather naked in the pale pink short-sleeved shirt Narcissa had given her to wear when she had woken up that morning, unused to wearing anything like it, having lived in baggy jumpers and oversized shirts most of her life to hide the bruises left by her father. The sun shone brightly overhead, causing a thin sheen of moisture to coat the young Gryffindor's forehead as she sat upon the bench that stood at the very bottom of Malfoy Manor grounds, overlooking a small pond that she had already discovered to be the home of an assortment of fish in all shapes, sizes and colors. She had begun her likely only solitary moment facing the water, but some time ago had chosen to examine the grounds around her. Malfoy Manor was quite simply magnificent. White stone bricks built 5 stories high stood impressively in the middle of the grounds, high arch windows with balconies just as beautiful gleamed immaculately, and pale gray stone steps led up to tall ornate double wooden doors, the only entrance that she could see from where she sat. The grounds surrounding the manor were vast open lawns filled with plants, hedges and trees as far as the eye could see. Expertly tended to and blooming with color. Pathways of soft gray stone tying each section together wonderfully. In all, it was the most beautiful home she had ever seen, and she really could now understand just why Draco had felt so entitled in his bragging. The place screamed wealth in abundance. So much that Hermione had never experienced in all her short years. She could hear the soft twittering of the wildlife that surrounded her, and she couldn't help but feel more than a little amused watching the 7 large pink peacocks strut around the grass comically. All in all, Hermione knew she had landed in the lap of luxury and couldn't help the anxiety that bubbled constantly within her that T's would all be grabbed from right under her, or she'd wake up, still in her dorm in Gryffindor Tower, to find this had all been an extravagant dream and she was still stuck as Dumbledore and Potter's little Omega Mudblood slave girl. When she had realized at the Ministry that the dark alluring alpha woman was her mate, she had acted rather rashly in pleading with the woman to take her to the dark low road without any certainty of what she would face when the alpha decided to do so. Though between the unknown and going back with Harry, she would pick the unknown any and every time. Especially when she knew she would fit the blame for their unexpected expedition to the Ministry. She shuddered to think of the numerous cruciatous curses she would have faced as a result. Though now she was here within the confines of the Dark Lord's followers, she felt rather afraid of her future. She knew Bellatrix and her sisters had been tasked with ensuring not only her loyalty but the truthfulness in her story. It scared her, the inner voice of all her tormentors, especially her Muggle father, reminding her of just how worthless she truly was. A voice she found herself constantly trying to fight and ignore. It was up to her alpha now to decide her fate, and from the level of consideration the Dark Witch had shown her thus far, she hoped beyond anything that her leap of faith would prove to be the right decision. She wanted desperately to be worthy of the older witch. Bellatrix was everything Hermione had ever dreamed of in an alpha. She was strong, incredibly so, fearless, skilled, and from what she had seen, she was also protective and caring. She couldn't have asked for a better mate. It was because of all of this that she had asked for the time she had been allowed out here in the garden. She knew sooner or later Bellatrix and her sisters would begin their questioning of her, and that would mean bringing down her barriers and letting them into her mind. Something she knew she would truly have to work at to do. Her mind had been the only sanctuary she had ever known, her entire life, and letting someone, regardless of if that someone was her mate, her alpha, into that sanctuary terrified her beyond belief. Tilda, so engrossed in her own mind, Hermione didn't hear the Dark Witch approach, nor did she realize how much time had passed since she had come out to sit outside. It wasn't until she felt arms wrap around her from behind that she noticed she was no longer alone. Her body stiffening automatically in response. "Hush now, it's just me, my little Omega," the Dark Witch whispered most tenderly, and Hermione allowed herself to relax marginally. The understanding that Bellatrix's presence now meant that she had run out of time, not allowing her to relax fully. "It's time, isn't it?" she whispered, less of a genuine question and more to communicate that she was aware she had to come inside now and was reluctant to do so. "It is, little one, though what about what must happen next has you so tense?" "Though don't for a second think to lie to me or deny it," the Dark Witch replied, her voice soft, questioning but firm, as if she already knew Hermione would not wish to share her thoughts. The brunette on her part couldn't help but smile slightly at just how quickly Bellatrix seemed to be able to read her, and despite the idea of someone wishing to know how she felt being a 4IGN1 to the young Omega, she appreciated the older witch's display of care. "I know what must occur, and for the most part I'm okay with what must happen. But the thought of allowing anyone so deeply into my mind scares me. You are my alpha, they are your sisters, so I trust you to a certain degree, but my mind has always been the one place I can find solace away from everything I have faced. Not Once have I ever allowed anyone access to it, and I am afraid of what it may bring to the surface. I'm afraid to be a disappointment to you," Hermione finally whispered after a few moments of silently trying to find her courage. She pressed herself back against the alpha as she spoke, trying to take as much comfort from the strong arms that held her as she could while communicating silently just how terrified she was. "I understand, Hermione, but this is something I cannot compromise with you on. It is a direct order from our Lord and we must carry it out. Your loyalty and your reasoning must be confirmed, and this is the only way we can be sure. We are at war and we cannot afford to make mistakes," Bellatrix replied, her tone making it clear that this would not be something she was willing to argue about. Mate or not, she wouldn't allow anyone to sabotage all they were working for, and Hermione understood that. She knew why it must happen, respected even just why it must happen, but despite that it still terrified her. She nodded stiffly, not knowing how else to reply, letting her alpha know she would comply no matter how reluctantly it would be. "I will command you if necessary, little witch, though I would much rather I didn't have to. You will learn quickly that I meant all I said. I may be your alpha, but you are my equal, Hermione. Once this is over you won't ever have to allow Anion into your mind if you do not wish to do so," the Dark Witch reassured, coming to stand in front of Hermione, her dark eyes usually soft with understanding as she offered her hand to her and began to lead her back up towards the manor. "Would you rather have us all sit on the bed or on the sofa with you, sweet girl?" Bellatrix asked her as she was led into the alpha's room, the older witch keeping a comforting arm around her. "The sofas," she replied instantly, not comfortable with her alpha's sisters being on the bed with her. Allowing them into her mind would be far too difficult and intimate, as it was without adding the intimacy the bed implied. "As you wish," the Dark Witch replied as she motioned for her sisters to situate themselves on the sofa across from the one she was leading Hermione to. The young Omega knew she was growing more and more anxious with each passing second and was glad when her alpha flicked her wrist, lighting the room a little more and starting a fire in the fireplace beside the sitting area, making the room feel more homely and safe as they sat together. Bellatrix sitting beside her at an angle but keeping her palm pressed against her back, a steady pressu which Hermione found grounding as she forced herself to take deep breaths and calm herself. "You are anxious enough, so we are just going to go ahead and start, sweet girl. Clear your mind, and when you feel us enter, do not fight us or try to shield yourself," Bella murmured gently as she brought a hand up to cup the brunette's cheek. Hermione pushed her face into her alpha's palm subconsciously, eking the comfort and warmth that emanated of the witch in waves. She knew that Bellatrix was using their bond to calm her and make her more at ease, and somehow she couldn't find it in her to be mad about the little manipulation. It strangely felt sweet, and she craved her alpha's care to such a degree that she wasn't willing to pull away from the Dark Witch. She pulled in deep breaths, allowing her alpha's scent to fill her lungs as she focused her mind, bringing down her shields willingly for the first time. "Open your eyes, sweet girl," Bellatrix's voice filtered into her mind in a gentle whisper, and she had to fight her own urge to ignore the request as she tempered the sudden fear she felt, allowing her own eyes to connect with her alpha's tender onyx eyes. "That's a good girl," Bellatrix praised, pressing a kiss to her nose and offering her a gentle smile. Hermione saw the moment the witch in front of her silently cast the spell to enter her mind, the older witch's eyes hardening lightly as she felt the alpha's magic infiltrate her mind. Panicking slightly, Hermione instinctively threw up her walls, entirely not expecting to be able to physically feel her alpha's presence in her mind. She panicked slightly at that thought. She wasn't meant to have her walls up. She had to bring them down again, but as her panic rose, so did the difficulty she was having in doing as she must. "Hush, sweet girl, I won't harm you. It's all right, just breathe and let me in." Bellatrix's voice was kind as it filtered into her mind, her alpha's magic seeming to engulf her in a hug, the soothing chocolate and vanilla scent laced with a hint of cinnamon and old books that she knew to be her alpha increasing rapidly to help calm her. "That's it, darling. Breathe," Narcissa's voice added also in her mind, and Hermione wondered how she hadn't felt her enter it like she had Bellatrix. "That was deliberate. Narcissa and I are both skilled leglemans, Hermione. You wouldn't have felt us enter unless we wanted you to, which we didn't. We entered your mind at the same time as Bella, though she has never refined her intrusion as we have. Andromeda murmured in response to her thought as she felt all three sisters probe at her mental blocks. Hermione smiled a little at her alpha sister's playful jibe at Bella's skill in legilimency, allowing the levity to help her reach the level of calm she knew she would need to bring her walls fully down. Not breaking eye contact, she drew in another deep breath before she refocused on her walls, imagining them crumbling and falling away from her mind, leaving her thoughts and memories bare for the Black sisters to view. She tried her best to zone out and not allow herself to view her own memories alongside them, but as they were literally viewing them inside her mind, she couldn't help but relive each painful, agonizing moment she had experienced. Her father's tyranny, Harry Potter's cruelty, Dumbledore's ire, each and every time she had been beaten and rid. ICU led all displayed for her alpha and her alpha sisters. They moved quickly, and she knew instinctively it was because they could sense just how upsetting reliving her own memories was to the young witch. However, she knew no matter how quickly they browsed, it wouldn't be quick enough. Disgusting, worthless, Omega Mudblood. The cruel words filtered in what felt like an endless loop, each memory becoming more and more painful. She was trapped, back in the basement as she heard her father return. Though based on the voices she knew he wasn't alone. Multiple sets of footsteps descending the stairs that led to her hiding spot. Her father sneering as he pulled her into the middle of the room. His friends surrounding her. She hadn't even a chance to look up before the first blow landed. Our world exploding into nothing but bright white pain. Hermione, what have you done? Her mother's fear-filled voice reverberated in her ears as the 12-year-old looked at the dark rose vines that he had somehow caused to start crawling up the kitchen walls. Her heart was pounding as she glanced at her mother fearfully. You're nothing, Omega, nothing but a filthy mudblood. You should be Hanu. Red I keep you around. Harry's eyes glinted in malice as he towered over her, and she was glad she had the sense to cover her head quickly as he brought his foot up in preparation. You deserve Betty. Hermione, Fleur whispered as she held her close, rocking them gently, soothing her. If you ever want to get away, come to my Moser and Phaser Avenue already permitted such. You are like my sister, Hermione. I hate seeing what they are doing to you, the blonde Vila whispered, clutching her tightly as they held each other close for the last time before the blonde alpha had to leave to return home. The memories were endless, and by the end of it Hermione had curled up into herself. Her thin frame racked with sobs as she clutched her middle tightly, praying for it all to end. Wishing desperately for her alpha to exit her mind, because as much as she understood why this had to happen, she hated every second of the invasion. She hated it. It terrified her to know that these three people, practical strangers, now knew her entire life, had viewed each memory as if they were there. That they were probably realizing as they watched how much her father had been right. How much Harry and Dumbledore were right. She was a useless Omega Mudblood. Alone and unwanted, and her mind short-circuited a little in panic as she found herself being picked up. The movement enough to startle her back into the present moment as she was sat upon her alpha's lap, straddling her alpha's knees in such a way she was facing her. Her head guided into the crook of a warm neck, her hands trapped between the bodies as Bellatrix began to hum quietly as she rocked them. It's over, sweet girl, all over, she heard, the words a confirmation. I'm so sorry we had to do that, little one, Andromeda voiced as Hermione felt the witch join them, her hand coming to rest on the small of her back. You're safe now, Hermione. We won't ever let anyone harm you again, I promise, Narcissa added, also pressing her hand to her back, and Hermione would be lying if she said that it wasn't the most comforted she had ever felt as her alpha and her alpha's sister surrounded her. She didn't know how long they sat together. Bellatrix, Narcissa and Andromeda not once ceasing their comfort, and as Hermione calmed she relaxed, eyed a gentle touch, nuzzling her alpha's neck in appreciation before peering up at the dark witch shyly, feeling rather self-conscious with the level of care she was being shown. Hi, sweet girl. Bella smiled, and Hermione found herself smiling back in response, offering a sheepish response. IPR. Omise you now, sweet girl, that Muggle man will pay, as will all who have harmed you. They will regret ever laying a finger on you. I meant what I said before. You are mine, you will always be mine, and you have never nor will you ever be the vulgar things they said you are. You are worthy, smart, intelligent, and I am proud to be your alpha, the Dark Witch whispered tenderly, and Hermione hadn't known. She needed to hear those words so much until she had heard them. Her alpha's words felt like a soothing balm on her tormented heart. They were words she had craved all her life, and it felt like a relief. Eileen, as she unconsciously smiled and pressed herself closer to Bella, despite the little space between them. "Thank you," she whispered as she tucked her head back into Bellatrix's neck, purring soft. When the Dark Witch brought a hand up to sift through her hair. "Do not thank me for seeing you as you are, sweet girl. I am not doing anything apart from what our whole world should. This is what we fight for. For that world you spoke of, where our future baby girl will never have to fear or fight for her life as you have. We may be the dark side, but I'd argue we are only doing what we must. T is right in a world that would rather see you cow. It is beyond time our world changed him." Her alpha responded, and Hermione knew it wasn't really a question, but she nodded anyway, fully agreeing with the witch's words. In the last 24 hours her view on good and evil had warped significantly. Her alpha's words causing her to think on what was truly dark. Yes, it was true, Bellatrix was the darkest witch of the age. She had a higher death count and had injured more than any alive, but was she really evil if those she had hurt and killed took pleasure in harming those more vulnerable than them? She didn't think so, though one thing she was certain of is she couldn't find it in herself to analyze any further. She would fight alongside her alpha without question, and if that meant she was dark or evil, then so be it. "Do you feel up for that inheritance test, sweet girl?" the Dark Witch murmured after a pause, having chosen to let her Omega mull over her words for a while. She was beyond proud of her mate. Having now witnessed all her mate had survived, she had no idea how the girl ever managed to build up the courage to go against the world around her. It brought her an all-new feeling of awe at just how brave the young witch had been to ask her to get her free. Merlin knew she didn't think that even she would have had the guts for that, especially knowing that if she had rejected Hermione that day, the witch would have undoubtedly faced even more cruelty for it. "I guess," the little Omega whispered, her eyes filled with curiosity and apprehension, and Bellatrix couldn't blame her for it. After all, she had been severely abused by one set of parents already, and as a witch who had grown up in the Muggle world, she wouldn't know just how much pureblood families doted on their kids. "It's okay to be anxious about it, my girl, but I can assure you of two things. One is that you were a pure blood, as blacks were cursed by a distant ancestor to only be able to find our mates in another pureblood family. You are my mate Hermione, so must belong to one of the sacred 28. And secondly, whomever your parents are, it is entirely your choice whether or not you want them to know you," the Dark Witch reassured, cupping her mate's cheek and nodding to her sisters when her mate's whispered, "Okay," reached her ears. Bella watched in awe as her mate seemed to come alive when Andromeda called her over to help make the inheritance potion, explaining in detail why each component worked and answering every question the young witch asked. Her thirst for knowledge reminded Bella of how he had been back in her school days, and in many ways still was. She seemed to soak up the information around her effortlessly, her eyes lighting with joy as Andromeda and Narcissa praised her understanding and natural skill in the subject. Bellatrix watched on from the sofa they had previously been sitting on, her heart warming at the sight of her sisters being so tender with her mate. He knew her girl would need plenty of as she healed from her past. After experiencing so much cruelty, she knew Hermione would need time and patience and more love than any would imagine, and the Dark Witch silently vowed to provide it in abundance. Smiling a tender sad smile, she summoned her Patronus, an impressive-looking black mamba. She sent it off to inform their lord that Hermione's story had checked out and that they were in the process of brewing her a heritage test. She would speak with him in person later, once she was certain her mate was settled for the evening. Not willing to be from the girl for long in the slightest. The knowledge of all the girl had suffered, having her feeling more than a little protective of her Omega. "Bella, it's time," Andromeda called over, prompting the Dark Witch to shake herself out of her own thoughts and make her way over to her now visibly tense mate. "It'll be all right, sweet girl, I'm here," she murmured tenderly as she wrapped her arms around the girl from behind, releasing soothing pheromones when her girl reached back to clutch her skirt with one hand. She tightened her arms around her, letting her know she wasn't going anywhere as she watched Hermione prick her finger, letting 3 drops of crimson fall into the potion on the desk in front of them. They watched together as the potion bubbled before turning from its murky gray to a deep purple, settling once it was sufficiently mixed. Sensing that Hermione would not be willing to pour the potion onto the heritage parchment, Bellatrix gestured for Narcissa to do the honors. As she pressed a reassuring kiss to the brunette's cheek. She held her breath slightly as they watched, the parchment changing in front of their eyes. Words appearing and rearranging on the previously blank page. Hermione reached out once the words stopped moving, bringing the parchment up so they could both read, and what Bellatrix saw could have stopped her heart in an instant if she were a more tender person. The names of Hermione's parents displayed for all to see. Alecto thought you were dead. Hermione didn't know how long she stood there, just staring at the page in front of her as her alpha's words rung in her mind. Over and over again, yet she couldn't let the page go. The page that told her, that showed her, that her whole life had been a lie. That she had been singled out and bore the brunt if the lights, torment over something that she now knew was so very untrue. She didn't know what to feel, though it felt like a storm was brewing within her. Deep anger, painful longing, an agonizing level of pain and disbelief all fought with one another. None winning the overwhelming fight. Sweet girl, please, talk through this. Somewhere deep within she knew that was her alpha's voice, but she couldn't for the life of her figure out how to respond, couldn't find the strength to move or even look towards the dark witches she warred with herself. It just seemed so illogical, so pointless, so daunting to know that she had, or has she couldn't quite work it out, parents. Pureblood parents that could have, if they had kept her, protected her from the agony that her childhood had been. Her mother, apparently, had wanted her, had loved her even. She had been devastated, Bellatrix had told her, when she had been torn from her mother's arms. At barely 5 minutes old and carted away. It had destroyed the Omega Witch when not an hour later, Hermione's father had taunted her over the death of her child. She had been wanted, she had been loved, but she had been denied, abused, broken repeatedly. She had been manipulated and haunted by her betters, beaten for simply existing. Yet she could have been loved, could have been, should have been. It hurt so much Merlin knew how she was still breathing. This agonizing pain in her chest that seemed to reverberate throughout her entire body. It hurt worse than any jinx, curse or crucio ever had. More than any broken bone, or internal bleeding had ever done. It felt like she was dying. If she could rationalize, she'd know it was just a case of sensory overload. Her brain wasn't coping with the overload of feelings. The emotional turmoil too much to process, so her brain had imagined something physical. But despite that understanding, she still found herself gasping and gulping greedily. Trying so hard to put in some sort of breath, to push air into her lungs. Lungs that felt as if they were filled with sand and she was drowning. Hermione, breathe, she was trying to. She wanted to tell them as Andromeda's voice joined her alpha's. Merlin, she was trying, but it was so much, too much. Please, just, little. Narcissa's voice now, she couldn't concentrate enough to figure out what anyone was trying to say. After years of pain, finally being safe to then find out her whole life had been a lie. Everything she knew about herself had been a lie, it had her feeling like her world was finally crumbling. Shattering, falling from her grasp, and there wasn't a single thing she could do about it. Bellatrix hissed as she felt the dull but warm pull. Ache spread up her right arm where her dark mark was currently burning, alerting her to her required presence with the Dark Lord. She guessed he most likely would be seeking to see what answers he had found when they searched through her Omega's mind and carried out the inheritance test. Having given them the whole day to do so, it had been over an hour now since they had carried out the test. An hour since it had been revealed that her mate was in fact her best friend's child. A child all had thought had been murdered 16 agonizing years ago. An hour since her mate had gone rigid and withdrawn completely into her own mind. She was admittedly still reeling from the revelation herself, both terrified and overjoyed that her best friend's child was in fact alive, but terrified of how much this was not only going to hurt her friend but her mate too. She could see how this new knowledge of her familial ties had shook her little Omega and couldn't imagine how much it would do so to her friend. She shivered slightly and worried upset as her traitorous mind conjured an image of Alecto the day they had freed her from the Pruitt brothers' home. Her beaten and bruised body infuriating Bella. Trix and the other Death Eaters, but that wasn't what had made the lasting impression on the Dark Witch. It had been the moment her friend had looked up to meet her eyes. The warm honey-brown eyes she expected were decidedly blank and dull. As if someone had robbed her of any spark of life. Her eyes were haunted, and in turn that look had haunted Bellatrix. Fulling her anger at the supposedly light side and motivating the Alpha to give her all when engaged in battle. Determined to give her friend some sort of retribution. Now she knew her friend's child was alive. Said child in which she was the alpha mate of, and she was entirely uncertain for the first time in her life about what would happen next. Nor did she have any idea how to help her little witch, who still seemed to be locked up tight within her own mind. She had entered this state almost as soon as her heritage had been revealed, and no amount of coaxing had been able to draw her out. She had tried, her sisters had tried. She had even tried using her pheromones to try and command her witch to come back to her. She had finally dismissed Andy and Sissa 20 minutes prior, not once abandoning her post, standing as close to her mate as the girl's rigid demeanor would allow. Gathering her wits about her, Bellatrix summoned her Patronus, asking it to alert her lord that they required Alecto to be present for this conversation. They were on their way, though they would be there as soon as possible, or as soon as she could guide the visibly vacant younger witch through the manor. BBHG. 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 It took Bellatrix almost 10 minutes to guide her witch down the several flights of stairs from the room they had previously occupied to the grand hall where her lord was currently waiting for them. The journey was filled with stops and starts as she kept her mate upright and ensured she didn't fall down and of the stairs. She would have picked her up or used magic to move her, but despite her usual no-nonsense and brash nature, she knew instinctively that touching her mate in any way that could be construed as restraining would 100% be the wrong move. Her Omega was already distraught, and she would be damned if she added to it. Even unintentionally, she bowed slightly as she walked in the room, showing her respect to her lord but unwilling to let her eyes linger too far of her little witch, who still hadn't shown any sign of returning from whatever safe space she had fled to in her mind. She felt her heart constrict at the sight, wishing she could do something to ease her little witch's distress. A throat clearing prompted the Dark Witch to finally look up properly, taking in the room's occupants. Alecto stood just off to the right of their lord, who sat in his usual throne-like chair in the middle of the room. Her friend looked paler than usual, those haunted brown eyes locked onto her mate, studying the girl closely. She could see the spark of something she hadn't seen in Alecto's eyes in years. True emotion was present in her friend's eyes, uncertainty and hope being the main two, as her Omega friend seemed to have to physically restrain herself from approaching, and Bellatrix knew that Alecto had an inclination as to whom her mate was without her ever having to say a word. I realize your mate is distressed, Bella, so we will try to make this quick. What did you find? Her lord spoke, and Bellatrix had to tear her eyes away from her friend to meet her lord's expectant but rather understanding gaze. Her story checks out, my lord. What my sisters and I witnessed within her mind is horrifying. But I will leave it down to Andromeda and Narcissa to divulge the details, as it would only set me off to do so, which would be the wrong thing to happen in this situation, she began, casting her eyes to her mate and her friend to show her lord without words what she meant. Alecto was still staring, restraining herself from moving even slightly. Her Muggle adopters were vile people, and the suffering they have inflicted upon her is barbaric. If the woman wasn't already dead, I'd seek her out and end her miserable existence, though the male is still alive and I would like your pay. Our mission to seek him out and make him suffer, she continued, breathing the words all at once in an effort to keep herself in check, restraining herself the best she could lest her scent distress her Omega any further. I'm glad she was honest. I want to oversee her training once she settles here. Of course you have my permission to do with her adoptive parents as you see fit, though I have the suspicion that her vile Muggle adopters isn't entirely responsible for your mate's current state. He inquired, his tone curious, but Bellatrix knew her lord well enough to see the signs of his fury and was secretly glad that she also knew enough to know it wasn't her he was furious with. We performed the heritage test, my lord. She is a pureblood, which is why I requested Alecto be here. I don't know how Hermione feels about this, but I thought you deserved to know, my friend. Her name is Hermione Lucretia Pruitt. She is yours, Alecto. She is your stolen child, she stated, turning her gaze to her friend, feeling it best to address her directly for this, and she saw the moment that her words registered in her friend's mind as her mate's mother shattered in front of her. Her frame beginning to shake as she sobbed, falling to her knees at the confirmation of what she had clearly been suspicious of. It can't be. They killed her. Her friend's words were laced with so much pain it was hard for the Dark Witch not to react and comfort her, but she knew she couldn't leave her mate's side, who at the sound of Alecto's sobs had reached out blindly for her alpha, her hand clamping down tightly on the Dark Witch's arm as if to tether herself. Bellatrix could see her mate trying to fight whatever paralysis she had been locked in, trying to bring herself back from wherever she had fled to in her mind, but she could also see that it could be quite a while yet before she succeeded. Without a word, Bellatrix flicked her wrist, the heritage parchment landing in her lord's hand for him to see. He took it with a grateful nod as he examined it. Bella speaks the truth, Alecto. The child is yours, her lord confirms once he had read the piece of parchment, offering it to the now quietly sobbing Omega, who had managed to collect herself enough to stand once more. Though Bellatrix doubted her friend would be able to stop the tears streaming down her face if she tried. There was silence as Alecto examined the parchment repeatedly, her fingers skimming the words on the page in disbelief. How? She breathed, asking the one question Bella had no answer to but would quite like to know herself. How did this happen? How does the girl they believed murdered for over 16 years turn out to be the Omega Mudblood of Harry Potter's group of disgusting followers? How does a girl, a baby, end up in he Muggle world to be raised by vile Muggles when she should have been with her mother all this time? She knew they wouldn't know the answer to that unless they could figure out what actually happened that night, but Bella had a feeling that Albus was very much to do with it. I don't have any answers for you, Hermione doesn't either. Though I suspect when she comes around she will be just as eager for answers as you are, the Dark Witch replied, her tone much more gentle than anyone was used to hearing from her, and she could see the slight shock in both her lord and her friend's eyes at just how gentle she was being, but couldn't find it within herself to care very much, because no matter who she was to the rest of the world, Bellatrix would always be whatever those she loved needed, and right in how she knew her mate needed a softer hand if she were to feel better. Bella. Her mate's voice was strained with anguish when she finally spoke, and the Dark Witch could see the pain etched on her own Ega's face as the girl pulled Bella to her, seeking comfort. Bella let her, wrapping the girl up in her arms and allowing her to tuck her face into the crook of her neck. Shush, I'm here, sweet girl, she reassured her, trying to soothe her as she sensed the growing anger in her mate's scent, which she could entirely understand. She'd be furious too if she had found her entire life to have been a lie. Hermione, Alecto whispered, her voice just as strained as Bella's mate's was. Though the sudden stiffening of the girl in her arms let her know that despite her upset she wasn't entirely ready to face the woman that should have raised her. Don't, she warned her friend, and could only shake her head as Alecto seemed to ignore her, beginning to approach them. Albeit slowly, arms stretched towards Hermione, and Bellatrix couldn't really blame her. She's sure she'd be the same if it were her just finding the child she had stolen and believed murdered. But she also could sense her mate's emotions then if her anger was evident in her scent, which it so clearly was. Hermione, Alecto whispered again as she got close. Bellatrix shook her head sadly as her young mate clutched at her, pushing her smaller frame tighter against her own. I can't, not yet, not now. Bella, I need time. Please, Hermione whispered, although it was clear the majority of her whispered plea was aimed more at Alecto than it was her, and judging by the stricken, heartbroken but entirely accepting look on her friend's face, Alecto had understood that clearly. The older brunette Omega retracting her hands to clutch at herself as she took a respectful step back, her gaze falling from where it was on the back of Hermione's head to the floor. Of course, baby, I'll be here waiting, whenever you're ready, the Dark Witch was surprised at just how steady her friend's voice was when she finally replied, looking up at Bellatrix with resolve shining in her eyes. Take your leave, Bellatrix, you have been granted leave for the foreseeable future. It is clear your maid needs you right now, and she should be your priority. Update me when she is ready to begin her training and we can set things up." Her lord's voice dismissed them. The Dark Witch nodding in acceptance as she bowed and began to lead her mate back out of the room, pausing briefly beside Electo despite her mate tensing again to whisper reassuringly, "I'll take care of her. I promise," before she swept Hermione out of the room and back up to her own chambers. HGBB. 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 A week later Hermione found herself in Malfoy Manor's extravagant library, curled up on a sofa in front of the fire with her head in her Alpha's lap as the Dark Witch read from the Legends, Magic and Myths in Magical Britain, her favorite book, while she gently carded her slim fingers through her hair. The last week had passed in quite the blur for her, from finding out about her true heritage to getting to know her Alpha and her Alpha's sisters. All three were close, she had learned. Had been closer before Andromeda left the family to marry a Muggle-born Alpha who she hadn't known at the time to be a violent oppressive man. He had tricked her into believing he followed the pureblood ideals of equality for all regardless of dynamics, and despite the many warnings from her family she had believed him. Marrying him thinking he loved her and would never harm her. She found out soon after how wrong she had been but was stuck in the marriage unable to leave. Especially after she found out she was pregnant with his child. Bellatrix and Narcissa hadn't known their sister had been tricked, and it had taken until only recently when Andromeda had seen her moment to escape now that her child Nymphadora was fully grown and living with friends on the Auror training program with the Ministry. Bellatrix had been furious when she found out both at her sister's husband and her sister for staying so long and being too proud to ask for help. Though they were working to rebuild their relationship gradually, she had also learned that her Alpha was every bit the sadistic monster she was portrayed as. Bellatrix had discussed it openly with Hermione, refusing to shy away in shame or hide any part of herself from her mate, and despite all she knew Bellatrix had done, she couldn't find it in her to resent her for any of it now that she knew exactly what the Dark Lord stood for. In the beginning of being led to the Dark Lord, Hermione had doubted she would ever be able to do anything the Light would consider dark. Not believing herself capable of dark magic, but the more she had learned the more intriguing the idea became of officially joining the Death Eaters as a member. Her Alpha had assured her that as her mate Hermione was protected and therefore would never be expected to take the Dark Lord's mark or join the fighting, that it was entirely her choice and her choice alone. Bellatrix and the Dark Lord had made it clear they still wanted to train her regardless of her choice to ensure that if she ever needed to, she could defend herself successfully. Something she was grateful for. It put her at ease. She loved having the choice, being able to make her own decisions, free from the worry of retribution or penalization, and as a result she had let her Alpha know that morning that she felt she was ready to begin her training. Bellatrix had been pleased. And had told her the Dark Lord was equally as glad that she was feeling comfortable enough to begin training. She couldn't say either that the thought of fighting those that had wronged her by her Alpha's side didn't appeal to her because it did. Surprisingly, she wasn't as freaked out by being considered a Dark Witch or dark magic for that matter. In fact, she quite thought her Alpha was extremely appealing as a Dark Witch. The feel of her mate's magic was intoxicating, but then again she knew she was entirely biased. She still had reservations, unsure if she could ever actually take pleasure in others' suffering as her Alpha did, but one thing she was certain of was that never again would she let anyone control her or harm her for her dynamic. There was only one thing that Hermione was struggling to come to terms with. Finding out so suddenly that she had a mother, one who desperately wanted her, who loved her, after everything she had experienced was overwhelming, and she had been unable to face the woman at all in the week since she had found out. She wanted to, desperately wanted to allow herself that love and belonging with someone willing to put her first. However, she was also terrified. Terrified and a little more than furious at the situation. She wasn't sure she would be able to see her mother and keep that anger in check. Her anger wasn't towards her mother, more aimed at her supposed father and the whole unfairness of the whole situation. She had so many questions and absolutely no answers. Why couldn't they have left her with her mother? Who took her? Why an orphanage? How different would her life have been? How different would she be? The questions swarmed in one enormous loop, and she hadn't been able to shake them, hence the reason for her current silence as she listened to her Alpha read to her. Bellatrix's voice was soothing, a majestic lilting sound that filled Hermione with feelings of peace, in ways that she didn't know were possible, and she allowed herself to enjoy it for the time being. She knew soon Bellatrix would ask her to talk through how she felt about her heritage, prompting her to meet with her mother, as she had every night this week. And the young Omega knew she would have to do so, sooner rather than later. She really didn't want this hanging over her and knew it was something that upset all involved. Her Alpha had clearly expressed her upset at the situation, being supportive in how Hermione felt but telling her that she felt stuck because Alecto was her longest friend and she knew she was hurting. It made her own heart hurt at the thought. She hated knowing her Alpha wasn't comfortable with the situation, and for both their sakes, along with Alecto's sake, she knew she had to face the older Omega and find the answers that tormented her. "I can feel you thinking, sweet girl," her Alpha murmured curiously, pulling her up and into her arms from where she was resting in her lap. Placing the book down on the arm of the sofa, she had found that with Bellatrix, the older witch loved knowing what was on Hermione's mind. The Alpha always asked her opinion, thoughts and feelings on whatever was being discussed, always listening with rapt attention and engaging her in stimulating discussions about all sorts. It was the most the young Omega had ever been encouraged when it came to learning and growing, and she didn't think he'd ever become tired of the ever-present curiosity in her mate's voice. "I'm thinking about my mother," she whispered back, looking up at her Alpha as she rested her head on the older witch's shoulder. "I'm scared to face her. I don't know how to process it all emotionally, and I'm scared of how I'll end up reacting to her. I'm scared of so much but furious at so much too," she explained when the Fae's only response was to lift an eyebrow in question. "I can understand that, sweet girl. Would it help if I told you what I know to be true in this situation?" Hermione nodded her head in response. Seeing the love and acceptance in her Alpha's eyes helped ground her, not letting her mind slip into its usual habit of swirling uncontrollably with thoughts. The soft circular rubbing of her Alpha's palm on her back also helped soothe her, and again she marveled silently at just how safe this witch made her feel. When Alecto lost you, she changed. She went from a loving, loyal and passionate woman to a ruthless, emotionless killer overnight, and she's never been the same since. Her Alpha's tone was quiet, almost hesitant when she spoke of Hermione's mother being a killer, but as it wasn't new information to the Omega, she didn't blink. Seeing that Hermione had taken her words for the explanation they were and hadn't visibly reacted to them, Bellatrix continued. "That day I gave her the parchment, confirming you were her child. She changed instantly again. For the first time in 16 years I saw true emotion shine from her. I felt her longing, her love, her pain at not being with you. And it almost brought me to my knees at its strength. If it weren't for my Alpha side being rather present with how distraught you were, sweet girl, I do believe it would have. From where I stand, Alecto sees you as her reason for existing. Her reason to fight, to love, to feel, and therefore I have no doubt that no matter what emotion you throw at her, she will let you and still hold you tight after. She's your mother, and she's spent 16 years agonizing over your loss. All she wants is a chance to love you the way you should have been loved. Anything else is irrelevant. Your father, those muggles aren't relevant to her. What is? As you and I believe that if you are to truly heal, then Alecto needs to be part of that." While Hermione agreed mostly with her Alpha, she couldn't help but worry still. That ever-present feeling of self-doubt niggling within her as the voice in her mind reminded her of just how worthless she was. She truly feared that she could lose her mother before she even knew her. That her mother wouldn't see her worth and reject her, that somehow Hermione would be a disappointment as she had been to her Muggle parents. There was also a part of her that feared similar treatment from her mother as she had experienced from her Muggle mother. They were both Omegas, and that scared her. And yet she craved the reality her Alpha painted with her words. Craved to know had it felt like to held by a mother's embrace, to be loved and fawned over like she knew some of her peers had been. So with a deep breath she raised her eyes to meet her Alpha's yet again, bringing her forehead to rest against the older woman's as she took in the ever-present chocolate and vanilla scent of her mate slowly. "Okay," she whispered after a moment, knowing that Bellatrix was waiting on her reaction. "Okay, I'll meet with her," Hermione panted, ducking out of the way if yet another hex aimed her way. Gritting her teeth against her annoyance when the dark man chuckled under his breath. At her obvious fatigue and frustration. They had been training for the last week twice a day. The Dark Lord had said it was important that she learn as much as she could as quickly as she could. He knew it wouldn't be long before the Order retaliated in some way for her disappearance. He wanted her to be able to stand her own against whatever they would try to throw at her, and she was GLA D to be finally learning at a pace that both thrilled and challenged her. The Dark Lord, or Tom as he'd asked her to call him after the third day of training, was a firm but fair teacher. Formidable and forgiving all at once, and Hermione was truly flourishing under his tutelage. The first day he had focused on all the basics, working her right through the current Hogwarts curriculum for Alpha and Beta students from first year right through to the 7th year, all of which Hermione had mastered easily thanks to her own private studying sessions the past year or so in the room of requirement. Tom had been impressed not at her ability to perform each spell, hex, jinx and incantation, but of her sheer magical knowledge. He had told her that not even he could claim to have such a sound understanding of magic when he was her age, and he had spent the majority of his time in the library. She found that the more she trained with him, the more she got to know him, the less she held any fear of him. And he was gradually becoming not only her mentor but the father figure she had always longed for. Something he seemed to sense and welcome. "Good, my child. Now stop a second, stretch out your muscles and collect your magic. Let's see how you fare in non-verbal casting." His tone was every bit commanding as it had ever been, but she heard the concealed affection when he spoke to her. "Okay, Tom." She smiled slightly, standing up from where she had thrown herself away from one of his spells, not even realizing that she had become so adept at dueling she was holding her own against him without really paying attention to the duel. Casting and defending instinctively now, and able to think about other things while she practiced. She hadn't noticed, but the Dark Lord and Hermione's unnoticed audience had. Though Tom wasn't going to draw attention to them just yet, unsure about how it would affect his youngest trainee. Hermione stretched, breathing deeply as she worked to loosen her muscles and regather her magic in her core. "I'm ready," she called as she strode back to the center of the room and bowed to Tom as he bowed to her. Pacing 10 steps back, they began again, Tom throwing the first curse at her before they had even turned to face one another fully. Hermione cast a silent Protega, her speciality. Tom had decided, having heard Bellatrix brag about her ability to cast and hold a strong defensive shield for durations of time under heavy spell fire without her wand or speaking, and something he had seen personally as he had began teaching her. They continued that way, throwing curses and spells at one another, increasing in their complexity for the next hour until Hermione felt herself begin to tire. Her concentration slipped slightly, and she knew that was a mistake when Tom grinned suddenly, disarming her with a quick outward motion of his hand as he simultaneously cast a full body bind on her. He held her there for a moment before releasing her, letting her gather herself before striding over and passing her wand. He smiled at her gently, with such a warm look in his eye it made Hermione preen slightly when he chuckled and ruffled her hair in the most fatherly gesture she had ever known. "You did well today, little witch. I am more than impressed with how quickly you are growing in terms of your spell casting. I will give you a break for the weekend as you have worked extremely hard this week. Next week we will start on the darker spells, so if you have a moment, browse the library." He praised, and if anyone had seen him in that moment they would have thought him just an ordinary wizard and not the most powerful dark wizard to have ever existed. Hermione had a hard time wrapping her head around just how kind and gentle he was with her. She knew it wasn't his norm. Had seen that fact the very first time she had seen him when he faced off against Dumbledore, and had seen it in his interactions with near enough everyone else. Sure, with Bellatrix, Alecto, even Narcissa and Andromeda he was softer somehow, but not to this extent, and she struggled to allow herself to trust it the first few interactions she had with him. Though he had quickly deduced why she was so fearful of him, and had offered her an understanding smile as he promised what she saw with him as what he would always be with her, because he knew that unlike the majority of his followers, Hermione was part of his family, and that made her different, worth knowing. Though she didn't understand why or how he had come to think of her as his family so quickly, but she wouldn't dare argue with the Dark Lord. If he wanted to claim her as family, she knew she couldn't do anything about that, and part of her didn't truly wish to either. It felt good to know she was included in a family. She nodded in response, allowing him to wrap her in a gentle but brief hug before she turned as he apparated away and began to make her way towards the training room doors. freezing in her tracks as she spoke. TTED, not just her alpha but her mother as well. Both standing by the door watching her, sporting matching proud smiles as they waited for her. She stilled, the same internal panic beginning to bubble up inside of her like it had the day she had found out who she truly was. Her eyes flashed to Bellatrix's, seeking the by now familiar dark brown of her alphas as she desperately hoped the Dark Witch would know just how much she wasn't ready for this moment. Though the slightly guilty expression the formidable witch wore let her know that she was perfectly aware of just how much this moment wasn't one she felt ready for. As much as she knew she had to face her mother for her to move on, she had hoped for a little more time. A few more days to wrap her head around everything she had learnt, but apparently that moment had to be now. Hermione let her irritation at her alpha be known as she scowled at the woman before turning away and moving back towards the middle of the room. She heard the door open and close and a set of hesitant footsteps make their way slowly towards her. She waited, not daring to turn round for fear of what she would see. She wasn't sure she could look at the love and longing that had been on her newly discovered mother's face the last time they were in the same room. She didn't know how to navigate any of the feelings that invoked in her. Hermione. Her name was spoken softly, and if the room wasn't deathly silently, she knew she probably wouldn't have heard it. Hermione, please, Mia Cara. The plea in her mother's voice was painful to hear and had her tensing even further. I don't know what to say to you. I don't know how to process any of this, she began, her voice just as soft as her mother's. Even though she thought she'd not know what to say, her words air truth when she spoke them. It seemed that the act of speaking them out loud, speaking directly to her mother, opened up the floodgates. She held up her hand, silencing her mother as she knew she was about to speak, and right now she needed to get this out before she clammed up again. I've spent 16 years in hell. Abused by my Muggle parents, beaten, starved and locked in a basement the majority of my life until Hogwarts. Do you know that going there was supposed to be my chance? My chance to be free. To learn, to grow away from them. But that wasn't the case. I was reminded every day that my place was to serve. Denied the classes of my peers for being an Omega, judged for my blood status, forced to serve the boy who should have died, tortured with the very magic I had hoped would save me. I don't know what it feels like to be loved. I didn't know what it felt like to feel safe even until Bellatrix, and I'm scared. I'm so bloody scared. After everything. She paused to gulp in a br. Eth, having not realized she began to rant, her voice growing steadily as she spoke. Spoke of the pain and utter helplessness she had felt growing up. Merlin knows how I survived. If it weren't for McGonagall and later Umbridge, I would have died at that school more than once in the past 5 years. But I faced it. I faced it all as bravely as I could. I didn't let any of them break me. I didn't let any of them see me fall apart until you, and that fucking scares me because with you, even the scent of you, the idea of you makes me want to fall apart, to crawl into your arms and hold on tightly, but that means being vulnerable. It means putting my trust in a stranger that the nature I was born with, ridiculed, abused and tortured for, forces me to feel that way, and still despite every bone in my body screaming out for you. For my mama, but my entire life has taught me that despite that I know that doesn't mean I'm safe. I know it doesn't mean I won't be hurt by you. I know you could ill possibly reject me, and I know that if that happened it would destroy me. She turned to face her mother now, swiping furiously at the tears that were streaming down her face relentlessly, and some air in her mind she wondered when she had started crying. I'm scared, I'm so scared, and I don't know how to deal with that, she sobbed out, now openly crying in front of the woman she knew to be her mother. Her real mother. Her knees buckled as the weight of all the emotion she had held back her entire life burst forth. Every agonizing moment of loneliness, anger, fear and longing she had concealed behind a stoic mask washing over her as she fell, unable to stand up in the face of it. Her mother's arms suddenly wrapped around her, pulling her body against the older witch's, and Hermione struggled, sobbing helplessly. BBHG. 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 Alecto stood as still as she could as she watched her little girl pace in front of her. Her daughter and Merlin. It had taken her a minute to marvel at that revelation when it was discovered. Her very much alive daughter whom she had spent the past 16 years mourning appearing back in her life after 16 years of grieving the cruelty of the moment her baby daughter was ripped from her arms and she had been informed she was dead. It was hard for her to remain still, to not give in to the longing she felt just to pull her severely malnourished and distraught child into her arms and hold her tight. But she knew she couldn't. Not yet, at least, and as much as it pained her she didn't truly mind waiting. She had waited 16 years already. The past week was nothing in comparison, especially now she had the comfort of knowing her child was safe and being cared for, even if it wasn't her getting to do that. She forced herself to stay still, even as her child began crying as she spoke, her words invoking horror and anger within the older Omega like she had never experienced before. How dare those vile muggles lay a finger on her child? How dare they even think of starving her or locking her up? They were dead when she got a hold of them. Because Morgana knew she would get a hold of them. She would find them, make them suffer, like they dad made her child suffer. Her baby, hers, she would already gunning for Dumbledore and numerous members of his bloody order. He would pay just as anyone who had ever harmed her baby would. To know that her little girl had been put through so much devastated Electo, she had yearned to be able to dote on her child, to love her and teach her the way any child should be loved. She had been denied that chance and she thought the agony she had felt had been too much for anyone but the pain her child had been through. That was surely too much for anyone to bear, let alone a child. Just the sight of those hazel eyes so filled with anguish, her thin frame shaking with emotion, though her control at holding back from her girl shattered when she saw her child begin to fall forward. Electo rushed towards her girl, covering the short distance between them in seconds as she stopped her baby from falling, pulling her into her arms, her daughter's back against her front. She held her tightly, even as her child fought to free herself from her. Electo held on, refusing to let go, grabbing her little girl's wrists as she began to lash out in her distress. Pinning her child against her as she pumped out as much of her pheromones as possible in hopes of calming her child. Though the way her girl had been able to withstand even their lord's pheromones, she knew it was a female attempt on her part to use her own. Hermione would only respond to them if she wanted to. Electo stood, holding her child up as she continued to sob even as Hermione stopped thrashing against her, the ONCE terrified girl attempting to flee from her mother's comfort, now gripping Electo's arms as if her mother were the only thing in this world holding her in place. As she felt her child stop struggling and her sobbing slow down, she began humming. It was an old lullaby. The same one her grandmother had sung to her mother and then her mother had sung to her when she was small, keeping her voice gentle and quiet. A steady, soothing sound that she hoped would help ground her distraught daughter. The older Omega couldn't accurately tell how long they stood there for, but she didn't mind. Glad to have her child relaxing slightly in her arms. As her child stopped crying, Electo allowed her to pull away, expecting her girl to re-establish her own personal space, but was pleasantly surprised when instead of moving away Hermione turned around in her mother's arms, burying her face against her neck and scent gland. The young Omega's arms wrapping around Electo's own taller, more muscular frame. She breathed in deeply, her nose pressed against the crown of her daughter's hair, and the scent of her daughter brought tears to her eyes. She smelled the same as she had when she had held her for the first time all those years ago before she was cruelly ripped from her arms. Her daughter's scent was what she associated with home, with love, with happiness, and she couldn't get enough of it now that she finally had her baby in her arms. "Do I get a chance to talk now, Piccolo Amore?" she whispered when she felt the last of her daughter's tense muscles relax against her. She smiled softly when Hermione nodded, not moving from her place tucked up into her. "First thing, Hermione, you are my child and I will never, and I mean I will never, abandon nor reject you. I have spent the past 16 years entirely heartbroken at not having you in my arms, and I will never let you go now that I have the chance to know you. Though I hear you, I understand why you fear this. Fear me. I know we will not have the perfect relationship right away. You will not want to come to me as a daughter should. You will distrust me, question me, second guess your worth to me, and I will never take that personally. What I can promise you though is that I'll work with you every day at your own pace to eradicate each and every one of those fears. And lastly, baby, I am so sorry you have had to experience what you have. I T infuriates and breaks my heart to know what you have experienced, and I will make sure that all this echo have harmed you suffer at either my own, Bellatrix's, or your own hands, she whispered, marvel. Ling at the way her daughter seemed to be hanging on to her words, the girl's head cocked slightly to the side, letting Alecto know that she was listening intently. Promise. And Alecto's heart broke, all over again at the uncertainty in her little girl's voice. I promise, Neonata, I've got you now, she replied, her voice full of certainty. I'm sorry for fighting this so hard, Hermione whispered after a while of them standing together quietly. Alecto pulled back, tipping her daughter's chin up to meet her own eyes as she smiled gently down at her girl. Do not apologize, Hermione, as I said. I understand why you fought this so hard, but I promise you it's all right. I'm not going anywhere. Now why don't we go out and have some tea in the library, otherwise I'm afraid your alpha may just tear the place apart in her angst waiting for us. Hermione nodded and Alecto squeezed her gently, pressing a tender kiss to her daughter's forehead before releasing her and offering her hand instead for our daughter to take when she saw the small pout form on the younger Omega's face. As Hermione took her hand, Alecto pulled her in beside her as she began guiding her out of the room. Don't be too hard on her, Mia Cara. She meant well, Alecto warned gently as they reached the library doors. Knowing her daughter would know she was talking about Bellatrix, she herself could only be glad that her friend had forced Hermione into facing her. She hated the distance that tonight's conversation was slowly melting between them. It had been difficult to stay away all week, knowing her child wasn't ready to face her, and now that she couldn't wait to begin to get to know her baby. Her little girl, more determined now than ever to ensure her daughter was loved beyond doubt and got the chance to blossom into whomever she desired to be. They found Bellatrix in the library, pacing, as Alecto had said she would be, in front of the dimly lit fire. As they entered, Hermione saw her alpha turn toward her quickly, her eyes a mix of satisfaction and weariness as she glanced between the two Omegas' clasped hands and her mate's face. It was an odd expression for her alpha, and Hermione couldn't stifle her giggle at the image presented. Her mama's own laugh letting her know that she too found Bellatrix looking so uncertain, rather comical. In all the time Hermione had knew her, not that it was all that long, she had never seen the woman look unsure of herself. It made her heart flutter slightly, finding the look oh so endearing. Knowing her alpha was just as human as she made her feel a little about her own insecurities and hang-ups. What is so funny, him? The Dark Witch questioned with an exaggerated pout, her confidence seeming to slide back into place instantaneously at their amusement. Nothing, Bella. Let's sit, shall we? Her mama directs, not letting her hand go as she leads her to the sofa beside the fire, seating them close together but leaving room on her other side for Bellatrix to sit next to her, which the dark woman did without prompt, clasping Hermione's free hand tightly as if she were afraid she would pull away. Fine, I take it you have both reached an understanding with one another? Her alpha asked, directing the question more at her than Alecto, and Hermione knew it was her witch's way of seeking an understanding of just how mad Hermione was with her. We did. I don't think everything's going to be okay overnight. It will still take time for me to trust Mama, but we both want to try, so thank you, Alpha, even if I dislike how sneaky you were about it. Your interference has helped, the brunette answered, offering Bellatrix a small yet genuine smile as she squeezed the older witch's hand. I'm glad, and her answering smile was almost blinding, her EY's showing relief and happiness as she gazed at them both. You deserve to have a mother who gives you all the love and support you deserve, sweet girl, and your mama deserves the chance to give that to you. It makes me feel slightly more at peace knowing we have at least corrected some of Dumblefuck's gross actions. He's bound to be furious when he realizes just who you are. Hermione nodded. Neither of the room's other occupants missed the dark look that flashed through the young Omega's eyes at the mention of the man who had tormented her for years. The brunette was seething really, now that she had spoken to her mama. Could see just how much her mother truly loved her, how different her life could have been. She wanted to know what had happened to her. How did she end up with Muggles? Why was she ripped away from her mama? I want to know what happened, but I don't know where to start, she murmured, questioningly. Glancing up at her mama, then at her alpha, letting them know she was willing to take their guidance on this. First thing we can do is get Narcissa to take you to Gringotts for an inheritance test. It'll let you claim your rightful name and place as the heir to both the Caro and Pruitt families, her mama replied, squeezing her hand gently before letting her go and sitting back, slouching into the sofa comfortably. A proud smile gracing her face as she looked between her best friend and her baby. It will also let you into the vaults, if there is any reasoning or tangible information as to why you ended up in the care of those filthy muggles, it will be in Gideon's vault. The swine may have kept a diary of some sort or papers that may contain clues, Bellatrix added, and Hermione let the Dark Witch wrap her in her arms and lay them back in the sofa as Alecto had done. Meaning she could see her mama better. Her Alpha's arms felt secure, the warmth of the woman seeping into her back and the intoxicating scent encouraging her to let the tension she didn't know she still harbored seep away from her, relaxing back into the elder woman. That sounds logical, she agreed as she rested her head on her Alpha's shoulder, contently. The younger brunette felt safe in that moment, her Alpha holding her close with her mama holding her hand, the older Omega's thumb stroking softly over her skin. BBHG. 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 Hermione blinked in shock as he heard her father's voice filtering through the basement, her underweight body shaking in fear as she heard the raised voices above her that by now she was more than accustomed to. Though she didn't know she had fallen asleep, she hadn't meant to, but her body still ached terribly from the beating she had received from her mother. She really should have finished cleaning the bathroom a lot quicker than she had done. It was her own fault, she knew, that her 9-year-old frame sported more bruises than clear skin and her head felt so darn heavy it was painful to move. But he'd be down soon. He always was. She just hoped that this time it was only a heating she received, because recently the way he looked at her, the way he touched her had made her uncomfortable. His harsh fists and kicks being replaced by caresses afterwards. His hands lingering for far longer than she wished. She wasn't stupid. She had long since wormed out the expectations of Omegas in this world. Had long ago learned to avoid her parents' rooms when the door was locked and long learned to patch up her mother afterwards. She just hoped she could avoid those expectations a little longer. She was only 9, she was a child. She hoped her father would not cross that line, despite him not really caring all too much that he had crossed every other line one could. She stifled a sob, pressing her grotty blanket to her face. Have to provide herself a little comfort and have to make sure he didn't hear that she was awake, because maybe if he didn't hear her, he would forget she was there. But such a hope was a fool's thought. He never forgot, and the boots growing closer told her he was already on his way. No doubt he'd be angry and drunk. He always was. Her mother would have told him of her failure, and that meant he'd be even harsher. Rat, get up here. His voice was a slurred growl as the door was unlocked and flung open. Light streaming down the cold steps and blinding her for a moment. Her vision taking a minute to come back to her. Dread filled her empty stomach. The feeling of hunger, one she had learned by now would never fade. Her stomach twisting into needles as she climbed as fast as her already beaten body would allow. Hurry, he hissed, causing her to push herself just a little faster until she crested the steps. Emerging in her mother's brightly lit kitchen. The surfaces cleaning back at her immaculately. Just the way her father expected them to. I don't know what we did to deserve such an unworthy Omega child, her father spat as she stood quietly, patiently, fearfully. Her eyes down saws, tea and her body shivering, and Hermione didn't know if it was in fear or because she was cold. His boots thunder closer and Hermione could smell the vile stench of beer mixing with his usual sweaty conch. Auction of angry pheromones in the air around him, sending her mind into panic as she struggled to remain still. It would only be worse if she moved away, if she flinched or fought back. He didn't like it when she didn't act compliant. They both knew his pheromones were useless against her if he truly tried to get her to submit, but she knew he'd only hurt her worse if she didn't play along. We give you a roof over your head. We feed you, we clothe you, and you repay us by being and you grateful lay about. His words were spat, contempt and anger lacing every word as his hand raised to strike her. Hermione sat bolt upright in bed, sweat dripping from her forehead as she looked around the room frantically. Her heart pounding in her chest, lingering fear and relief competing for priority as her EY's steadied and processed her surroundings. She was in her room, the one she shared with her Alpha. Bellatrix had gone out to update the Dark Lord. She wanted to stay up and wait for her alpha but must have fallen asleep for a little while. She clutched the dark comforter under her fingers, taking deep breaths of her alpha's lingering scent. Taking comfort where she could to ground her. It had been a while since she had experienced a nightmare. A perk of sleeping beside Bella was that the dark witch's presence seemed to chase away all the nightmares she had suffered prior to meeting her alpha. This one had been no less realistic and terrifying as any she had experienced before, and it made her skin feel itchy. Her eyes hurt from the tears. She didn't realize she was still crying and she felt as if she were trapped. It was always the same, and she knew that the best thing for her right now was not the steaming hot shower she wanted to immerse herself in right now, but a walk in the fresh air. It was the only thing that did truly help. Showering helped to a degree, but she knew at times it caused her to spiral back into those same dark memories and she would end up scrubbing herself raw. Fresh air would clear her head and calm her. She always felt her strongest surrounded by nature. Her magic thriving when she could feel the world around her unobstructed. Stifling a sob, she forced herself up off the bed, summoning Bellatrix's thick winter cloak to her hands, wanting to be surrounded by her alpha's scent, pulling her hair back into a messy bun with a casual flick of her wrist as she moved towards the door. The evening breeze was cool on her overheated skin as she moved slowly down towards the pond. It had become one of her favorite spots in the manor. Her go-to when the world around her grew too overwhelming for her. It was a place of tranquility, of peace and freedom, and usually it was a place she could be alone. Bellatrix having long since noticed she needed solitude at times, to rest her mind and digest the world around her. It had become her safe place, somewhere she could just bask in the still beauty that was the manor grounds. She could feel the cool night air wash over her skin, breathing deeply to fill her lungs with the fresh air, cooling her skin and bringing her back to a sense of safety and comfort. She still found it strange that she had found herself in this place, a sanctuary from a lifetime of pain. Merlin knew that asking Bellatrix to take her that night at the ministry was a gamble, one that could have ended terribly for her, and ever since, she felt as if she had been on a whirlwind adventure, albeit an adventure that felt more safe than she had ever known. From finding her mate so early in her life, to her training with Tom, and even finding out about her true mother. Regardless of how terrified the thought had made her to begin with, being held by her mother felt safe, being near her felt safe. A feeling that until now she had never associated with a parent. All her life her parents had done nothing but harm her. She feared them, loathed them, and loved them in equal breaths. The sound of her Muggle father's boots on the floorboards above her head. The feel of the cold basement floor, her own personal Bogart. So to know she had a parent who genuinely loved her, that wanted to care for her, protect her, wanted to see her happy, was of course terrifying. Hermione was bright, intelligent, and no stranger to Muggle psychology, so she understood her fear. Knew it was normal to fear a parental figure. After all, her adoptive parent had put her through, and she knew it would take a while for her to work through that fear. But for her mother's sake and her own, she would work through it. Hermione took another deep breath, wrapping her alpha's cloak around her tighter as she watched the gentle rippling of the water as the fish swam, the water's surface reflecting the fairy lights that littered the garden paths back at her, the golden hue glittering around her. "I find the garden is gorgeous at night here, peaceful," a voice spoke, startling her slightly as Hermione whipped her head around to find Andromeda, her alpha's sister, walking towards her slowly. At her startled reaction, the older brunette raised her hands in a gesture of peace, smiling in understanding at her. "Sorry, Hermione, I didn't mean to startle you, merely at your attention," the older Omega said as she took a seat beside her, and Hermione smiled in response, adjusting her position to face her slightly. "It's all right, I was just lost in thought." "I could see that. Anything you want to talk about?" Andromeda asked, looking concerned. And the question was a loaded one. Hermione could see, could hear even, the concern in the Omega's voice, but she didn't know how to answer. Didn't know whether she could face being honest with the woman. She didn't know Andromeda that well. Her and Narcissa may be her alpha sisters, they may have been in her mind and seen all her memories, but she didn't know her. Though even if she did, she didn't know if she would want to divulge the nightmare that had led her out here in search of solace. "It's okay if you don't want to talk about it. For years I didn't, I couldn't, and truthfully I still can't when it matters most, but I get it, darling. It can be hard to voice our demons, Andromeda continued, seemingly sensing her inner panic. Though her wording was enough to catch Hermione's full attention, her mind filling with questions. What do you mean when it matters? She asked, giving voice to her curiosity. Not that she expected a response. She just knew herself well enough to know that her curiosity would only burn brighter if she didn't at least ask. It's a long story, if you have time to listen, was her reply, and she couldn't help the look of surprise she shot the other woman at her willingness to share something she sensed may be quite personal. Andromeda chuckled quietly at the younger Omega's expression, patting her knee gently. I may not always know what to say when it comes to my sisters Hermione, but I know when my own discomfort matters less than that of someone I care for. You've been through a whole lot more than one so young should ever have had to endure, and if me sharing my story with you helps even slightly, then it will be worth the discomfort. I don't want you to tell me anything that makes you uncomfortable, Hermione replied softly, her surprise giving way to concern. It's all right, I trust you. Andromeda snapped her fingers, a house elf the younger brunette didn't recognize. Say appearing in front of them, and Andromeda asked for 2 large mugs of hot chocolate before settling back into the bench. Getting comfortable, her voice no more than a quiet murmur. As a child I was a little more than willful. I was raised to believe in my own superiority. I was a pure-blooded Omega, and a member of one of the most influential houses within the Sacred 28. I believed myself unstoppable. I grew up with stories of how the Muggles were barbaric and how Albus Dumbledore and his henchmen were just as vile. Our parents taught us to believe the opposite of what we were to learn in Hogwarts. It was ingrained in our minds that no matter our dynamic we were worthy and able to do whatever we wanted with our lives. She began, chuckling fondly. Her eyes distant, and Hermione could see that the older woman was lost in memories of the past. Getting to Hogwarts I was a little startled at the disregard and hostility I was treated with. Being exposed to the prejudices Albus teaches for the first time scared me, but Bella was there to protect me. I may have been seen as inferior by all the other alphas that weren't pure-blooded, but it didn't matter too much because with my family's influence and protection I was still untouchable. My 3rd year I became the target of a group of Muggle-born alphas who believed it their job to best me down to my rightful place below them. Now Bella tried to protect me, but it didn't matter how many times she heeded them or beat them. Whenever she wasn't around they would attack. Halfway through the year they cornered me, and I believed they intended to do more than just scare me. They pinned me to the ground. One of them, Kyle Brett, was above me, telling me all the disgusting things he wanted to do with me, and I believed I'd have to suffer them. Her expression turned dark, her eyes still far off, but Hermione could sense the fear and anger she felt at the memory. The older Omega's body tense, and she couldn't help but reach out to her. Andromeda catching the movement and pulling Hermione's hand into her lap, sandwiching it between her own. I screamed for Bella, but it wasn't she that came to my aid. It was another Muggle-born alpha, Edward Tonks. He beat them up, warned them off, and then helped me up, apologizing for what they had put me through. He was surprisingly charming, sweet. Everything I was told he couldn't be. My parents tried to warn me about him. How he would only harm me. That his behavior was aroused to get me away from my family's protection. But Edward was the most handsome boy I'd ever seen. He did everything right. He defended me all the time. Against everyone. Even against the headmaster, and before I knew it I was madly in love with him. I thought he was my forever. But then he started to change. It was subtle at first. When my family and I argued about him he would comfort me, telling me that they were prejudiced, that they were the true monsters if they couldn't let me be happy. By my 7th year I couldn't stand my parents, and my relationship with my sisters was virtually non-existent. Just before the end of my 7th year I found myself pregnant with Edward's child, and I agreed to marry him. My parents disowned me for turning my back on our traditions and culture, burning me off the family tree. It made me angry, and I believed I didn't need them. That they believed in all the wrong things. I believed what Edward had spent years telling me, that Muggleborns and Muggles weren't the barbaric creatures from the tales I'd been told growing up. By the time I realized my parents were right, it was too late. Our wedding night, he changed and he became the man my parents wanted me about. He was cruel, evil, and he had full control over me. I was stranded alone with him and pregnant with his child. I saw no way out. So for years I suffered rather than reach out to my family. I didn't know how to ask for help. I was ashamed, scared that they would reject me again and afraid for my child's life, and it wasn't until this year that I decided enough was enough. Nymphadora is grown now, moved out and living with friends. Luckily she's a beta and I raised her to believe in equality in secret. Outwardly she plays the dutiful beta, inwardly she knows the truth about her father. I told her the night she left that I was going to the Dark Lord for help. She understood and came with me to meet him. She's now a spy for him within the order. He granted me safety and ordered Bella and Narcissa to care for me and the injuries I sported. They did, and although they were glad I came back, happy to see me, they've never truly forgiven me for leaving in the first place. No matter how hard I try, I don't know what to say to help heal our relationship. I don't know how to say a NY of it to them that will help them understand the terror I live daily, how convincing he was in the beginning, or how even now nearly a year on and I still suffer from the nightmares. Nightmares I have no words to express. She finished, her body tense, her voice a near whisper as she finally glanced down at Hermione, and Hermione's breath caught at the pain she could see shining within tear-filled eyes. Unable to sit by and witness the older Omega's pain without doing anything, Hermione found herself reaching forward to hug her Alpha's sister. Not complaining when the older woman took it a step further by pulling her onto her lap instead and hugging her close. Resting her head on her shoulder, her nose to Hermione's neck. "I'm sorry you had to go through all of that alone," Hermione whispered, combing her fingers through Andromeda's hair gently. "I suffer nightmares too, it's why I'm out here. I woke from one and Bella isn't home yet, so I came outside for some air and to feel a little more grounded," she offered, sharing a little more than she thought she would in response to all she had learned from the older woman. Everything Andromeda had said made sense. It shone light on the tension she could sense between Bellatrix and Andromeda. The anger she sensed from her Alpha directed at her sister, no matter how misplaced Hermione now thought that anger to be. "If it helps any ink, just telling Bella and Narcissa exactly what you've told me might help. It might help them understand," because Hermione wanted to believe she knew Bellatrix well enough to know that despite the representative she had, her Alpha was highly intelligent and cared for her family far more than any she had ever met. She believed that Bella would understand, and she wanted Andromeda to feel safe again. She didn't want her to suffer alone. "I'll try, darling, but the same can be said for you. You need to try to talk about it. It won't ever heal if you simply avoid dealing with it." Andromeda's response was a mew. RMUR in her ear before the older Omega pressed a kiss to her temple, settling them further back on the bench. Sighing quietly in response and snuggling into the older woman further, content to sit in the silence that surrounded them. Her mind strangely quiet, the horror of her recent nightmare a distant thought in the comforting embrace of her Alpha's sister. Hermione walked beside Narcissa into Gringotts with her head held high, keeping close to the older Omega woman but refusing to cower in response to the various displeased scents around her. She had woke this morning back in her own room, not remembering how she had got there. Her mate was curled into her back, already awake, drawing lazy circles on Hermione's hip. It had made her smile as she turned and snuggled into the dark witch, her smile growing wider when a gentle kiss was pressed to the top of her head. It had been the perfect way to wake up after such an emotional night. Bellatrix had informed her that she had fell asleep in Andromeda's arms outside, and the older woman had carried her back up to her room, sitting with her as she slept until Bellatrix had arrived. It made her feel warm to know that even asleep her Alpha's family had cared for her in such a tender way. Never before had she dared fall asleep in such a vulnerable position. She knew if she had been at Hogwarts or at her Muggle father's, then her falling asleep outside would have ended horribly for her. After a lazy hour enjoying the older witch's warmth and tenderness as they lay together, discussing everything and nothing, they had joined the Malfoy family minus Draco, the Dark Lord and her mama for breakfast. Andromeda having already left to meet with Tonks for breakfast. She had then dressed, and after a hug and kiss on the cheek goodbye where Bellatrix had threatened to skin Narcissa alive if any harm came to either of them, Narcissa had guided her into the flow. They had stopped at a few of the shops on the way to the bank, Narcissa needing to pick up potion supplies and treating Hermione to a few new books as well as an entire new selection of robes for both everyday and formal wear. It made her a little uncomfortable because Narcissus refused to allow Hermione to pay for even the cheapest items she had purchased. "You're a member of our family now, little witch, and is the oldest, whom is not technically a prison escape or disowned. Then it falls to me as acting head of the family to ensure you are provided for. At least while you are still technically a student. Plus you are for all intents and purpose my baby sister. It is my job to make sure you look your best always. It wouldn't do for you to be walking around looking like a common muggle when you are to be seen beside the wizarding world's ice queen, you know." Narcissa Dee whispered reassuringly but teasingly, seemingly sensing her upset at the situation. Effectively making Hermione giggle at the blonde's flippant mocking of the title bestowed upon her by those who deem Narcissa to be cold and unfeeling simply because she was well trained in navigating the social ladder. Stoic and emotionless in front of the masses, but she was warm and loving when it came to her family. Such was the life of being a pure-blooded aristocrat. Hermione was a little glad she had met this witch's family and not as an enemy. She had seen the woman in public before but had never interacted with her until she woke up in Malfoy Manor. Getting to know her meant that all she felt now in the face of Narcissa's ice-cold public image was respect. She hoped she was emanating even half the indifference as the older Omega was. Sissy seemed so unbothered and unaffected by the harsh glares and disapproval that surrounded her. Her head was high, her stride confident and commanding, and she held an aura of power around her that left Hermione in awe. Narcissa Malfoy née Black was a woman to be admired and not one to be trifled with, and Hermione loved that this woman was now her family. Quote, "Stop staring at me so intently, Hermione, or I'll begin to think you're rather attracted to more than just one of the Black sisters," the blonde teased, startling her out of her observation of the woman, causing her stride to falter slightly, and if it weren't for Narcissa's arm in her own she may have fallen completely. "What were you really staring for?" Narcissa inquired when she had managed to get hold of her amusement at Hermione's reaction. "Tell you later," Hermione replied, shaking her head softly when the blonde raised a curious eyebrow in response. She wasn't really all that willing to get into her thoughts in such a public place. Regardless of the fact she knew they were speaking quietly enough as they walked that no one would overhear. With a much gentler smile of understanding Narcissa finally brought them to a halt in front of a large oak desk. Hermione had to crane her neck back to peer over the top, finding a rather grumpy-looking goblin she vaguely recognized from her previous trips to the bank. She had learned quite quickly from observing others around her that the goblins were all rather dour-faced but responded well when treated with respect. Which in Hermione's yes wasn't too much to ask if anyone really. She didn't understand how anyone could look at another being and willingly treat them cruelly. Though she knew firsthand just how cruel people were, she still didn't like knowing others experienced the same harsh treatments. She smiled up at the goblin, bowing her head in respect as she spoke politely. "Good afternoon, Rannis, sir. Miss Granger," the goblin greeted just as politely, offering her a small bow of the head in response. "Lady Malfoy, what may I help you both with today?" "I would like to do a heritage test if it's possible, Rannis. I've recently come into the knowledge that I was adopted and Lady Malfoy offered to accompany me because I hadn't a clue where to start." She lied smoothly, using the cover she had discussed with Bellatrix and her mother. She knew Albus Dumbledore thought her likely dead, and despite going missing from school grounds no one had reported her missing. Still, it was best to be armed with a story. One that wouldn't be questioned too closely, and this one seemed most passable. The goblin nodded easily, not questioning the more than believable lie, and gestured for them to follow him behind the counter. He led them to a private room, just off of the main reception. Hermione could feel the wards around her as they entered. The wards felt heavy as they passed through, and Hermione knew that no one would be able to eavesdrop on the ongoings of this room. Something she was grateful for. She did not want to risk anyone gaining the information that was revealed. Especially not Harry or anyone under Dumbledore's command. "If you would like to take a seat in front of me, we shall begin." Rannis gestured to the vacant seats in front of the desk he had moved to sit behind. A small wave of his hand and a softly spoken word in a language Hermione didn't recognize had a small ceremonial dagger, a clear piece of parchment, and a quill appear before them instantly. The goblin's display of magic was illuminating. A Hermione didn't understand why anyone in the right mind thought to disrespect a creature that held so much power. She had read about the Goblin Wars. Knew that all goblins had been banned from Auni. Using a wand to ensure that there wasn't an uprising, and she knew that the relationship between the Goblin Nation and wizarding kind was frail at best, tense at worst. If the wizarding world continued to show the goblins such disregard, there would probably come a time where they made that uprising happen without the wands. That was something she could possibly use to Tom's advantage. She would have to bring it up at their next lesson as something to discuss in depth. Using the dagger, allow 3 drops of your blood to fall onto the parchment below, and then use the quill to sign your name if you will, Rannis instructed. Moving the parchment and dagger closer to her, Hermione didn't hesitate in doing as asked, keen to give the goblins the proof they needed that would then grant her access to her parents' vaults. She was desperately hoping for any sort of clue as to how she ended up with the Grangers. She needed answers for her mother's sake too. Her mother had suffered at his hands for close to a year as a prisoner of war, only to have her baby and her brother taken from her within such a short period of time. It had devastated Alecto, and Hermione knew that getting answers as what happened that night she was ripped away from the older Omega, would be a sense of closure for both of them. She prayed to Merlin and Morgana both that Gideon Pruitt's vault contained those answers. She used the point of the dagger to prick her index finger quickly, squeezing the flesh around the small wound together to get the blood flow going. After 3 drops had fallen on the parchment, Hermione wandlessly and wordlessly healed herself, healing the small wound being of little challenge to her now that she had been training with the Dark Lord. She suppressed a smirk at the goblin's wide-eyed stare as he witnessed her casual use of her magic. For one as young as she was, she knew it was a rarity to see. Even among the eldest living witches and wizards, wandless magic was a feat, wandless and wordless even more so. She had not thought much of healing herself that way though, and now realized it was probably the best thing she could do to ensure that if Tom did decide to invite the goblins into his side of things, then they would at the very least be interested in talking. The goblins-like creature, human and not, were just as attracted to power as any other would be. Picking up the quill next, she took a subtle deep breath before writing her adoptive name down on paper. Aware that she couldn't write her real name as she wasn't supposed to know it yet. Hissing a little at the sting she felt on her hand as she wrote, she cursed herself quietly, feeling a little foolish that she hadn't realized just by looking at it that the quill was a blood quill. It looked very similar to the ones she had been forced to use on numerous occasions by Albus when he felt she was stepping out of line. She shook the memory off and watched fascinated as the blood from the quill and the blue from her finger congregated together in the center of the page, bleeding out and swirling all at once as it broke apart and began to move across the parchment. Words forming in an elegant script similar to her own. Name: Hermione Jean Granger, Hermione Lucretia Pruitt. Born the 19th of September 1979. Dynamic: Omega. Blood status: pureblood. Heir to House Pruitt. Heir to House Caro, heir of Ravenclaw, heir of Merlin. Wand 10 3/4 walnut. Dragon heartstring. Patronus: Black Panther. Mother: Alecto Caro. Father: Gideon Pruitt deceased. Other relations: maternal uncle: Amicus Caro deceased. Fraternal uncle: Fabian Pruitt deceased. Fraternal aunt: Molly Weasley née Pruitt. Fraternal cousins: Ginevra Weasley, Ronald Weasley, Frederick Weasley, George Weasley, Percival Weasley, Charles Weasley, William Weasley. They were no shock to her, she had seen it all before after all. But she had a part to play, so she gasped audibly, looking up in fake shock, feigning disbelief. The goblin took the parchment, his eyes widening too, and Hermione could only guess it was because he more than likely believed the Pruitt line had died with her father and his twin brother. She knew the Wizarding world had strict laws when it came to inheritance, and as Gideon and Fabian had been the last heirs to House Pruitt, Molly Weasley née Pruitt and her brood were set to inherit the money and all assets in a mere few years' time. In Wizarding law, if no direct descendant claimed their right as heir within 20 years of the last heir's death, the inheritance went to the closest living relatives, regardless of their entitlement to the house. Merlin knew the goblin was probably imagining the anger they would face at the hands of Molly Weasley when she was informed she was no longer in line for the inheritance. Everything would go to Hermione. As far as she had heard from Ron, the family had been talking about the Pruitt inheritance since their deaths, but as the Pruitt brothers had never expected to die arrogance or confidence, she didn't know they hadn't left a will at the time of their deaths. It had angered Molly Weasley. Bill the Weasley's eldest son had let slip, remembering just how infuriated his mother had been all those years ago. It made her feel a little smug. It was karma at its finest. Merlin knew the Weasley family had been some of her biggest tormentors. It would be Meyer T. Han a little just to inherit the wealth they sought right out from under their noses. Worthless little Omega Mudblood, it was what they had called her, reminded her and tormented her with her whole time at Hogwarts. Now she had her mother, her mate's family, and the Dark Lord behind her, backing her, empowering her, and to top it all, if she was the heir to not one or two but 4 powerful houses. She would make them rue the day they ever met her. They would suffer for every insult, every ounce of pain they had caused her, and she would revel in it. She shook herself, a little startled at just how dark her thoughts had gone so quickly. It wouldn't do to let herself get carried away. Sit tight for me a moment, Miss Pruitt. I need to collect your rings and inform Bogrod, Rannis declared, standing quickly and making his way out the warded door, his shock still visible on his face. Hermione chose to remain quiet, Narcissa simply laying a reassuring hand on her arm in quiet support as they sat. Sensing just how reflective all this was making her, she had known at the beginning of this that going with Bellatrix would either mean her joining the Dark or her death. She was glad it hadn't resulted in her death, but she didn't realize it would be so easy to embrace the darkness that surrounded the Death Eaters. The Dark Lord was not a good man. She knew that as certainly as she knew she belonged to Bellatrix Black. His Death Eaters had done some horrendous things, and not all of them were even remotely nice people. But the cause was just. It was about equality as much as it was about power, and that was something she could get behind. She had no issues with Tom or his followers less than morale actions. It was a necessity of war. She knew that. She, however, did not think she would see the appeal in the darker aspects of the dark side. Sure, dark and malicious looked good on her alpha. She just never thought she herself would be so willing or eager to join her. She knew she was capable, that she would do what it took to keep her family safe, and if it meant being dark and malicious, then so be it. If revenge was part of that, then who was she to punish herself for it? Hadn't she suffered enough at the hands of the world? She couldn't really be blamed for wanting those that had harmed her to suffer for it, could she? The door opening and Rannis, followed by Bogrod entering, brought Hermione out of her own inner musings. She smiled politely at them, still pretending to be rather clueless about what all of it meant. Miss Pruitt, Rannis and I have reviewed the results. We have a few documents you need to sign, and then we can issue you with the keys to your vaults, Bogrod stated as he took the seat Rannis previously sat upon. He slid 4 separate files over to her, the Pruitt one, followed by the Caro information, then the Ravenclaw, and lastly the Merlin file. He instructed her to sign the front page of each, which she did without issue, after clearing up first that she wanted to be known as Hermione Lucretia Caro rather than Pruitt. After all, her mother was the one she would much rather be linked to than the man that had held her mother prisoner. It wasn't much of an issue. Bogrod simply waved his hand, conjuring an official name change document which she signed, Narcissa acting as her witness. Meaning she got to sign all 4 of the house folders with Caro. Something that she knew would please her mother. The process wasn't all that long, and after Bogrod had informed her that the details of her estate and inheritance would be sent to her later in the week. Once he had been able to personally count each and every asset she was set to inherit, of course. She was handed the keys to all 4 vaults. She smiled and politely thanked both goblins, filing away the information in her mind about just how much they seemed to take care of those with considerable wealth. The trip certainly was turning out to be an extremely valuable one in terms of intel gathering. She and Narcissa decided to forego visiting the other 2 vaults, deciding to check out the Pruitt one after grabbing a few thousand galleons from her mother's vault for the woman. She was still a prison escapee and couldn't collect her money herself, so had asked Hermione to grab money for her while they were there. The trip to the Caro vaults was a quick one. Eckhart took them on the track to the lower levels quickly, Hermione bracing herself the whole way, not exactly trusting the old wooden carts to keep her safe. She was in and out the main vault quickly. before they boarded the cart again for a short trip along to the Pruitt vaults. Hermione hesitated as she stepped onto the stone ledge outside the heavy iron door. Her heart pounding in her chest at the thought of what may be contained inside. What would happen if there weren't any answers to find? What would happen if she came out just as clueless as to what happened all those years ago as she was now? It would haunt her, torment her, and worse, it would offer her mother no comfort or closure. She wiped her suddenly sweaty palms on her dress robe, hoping that she wasn't visibly as much of a mess as she felt inside. "It'll be all right, Hermione," Narcissa offered gently, resting her hand on the small of her back and giving her a nudge forward. The goblin pointed to the handle, telling her that she would be required to let a little blood to deactivate the blood protections on the door, or Narcissa wouldn't be able to enter with her. She did so almost without thought, finding the small pin in the middle of the door handle and dragging it across her skin, letting her blood seep into the handle. She felt the vault's magics embrace her as her mother's had, her father's bloodline recognizing her as their own. The way it embraced her like she belonged made her feel sick to her stomach. The family magic making her feel warm as family magic was tend to do, but the notion that this man who had fathered her would care when he had ripped her away from her mother and tell her she was dead, allowing her to end up in the Muggle world as an Omega, disgusted her. He would have known fine well how she would have been viewed. Yet he had still made the decision somehow that her mother wasn't to have her, destroying her life and her mother's life in the process. Not to mention the fact that as her mother was a prisoner of war when she was conceived made her image of the man even more vile. Not that she wanted to delve too deeply into that thought. The very notion she was the result of her mother's pain hurt deeply. No matter how much she knew her mother wanted her. The locks on the door released audibly, the iron separating the inside of the vault from the cavernous walkway swinging eerily inwards to allow her entrance. She reached backwards, finding Narcissa's hand and grasping it. The older Omega tightening her grip instantly, offering her that steady silent support without any sense of hesitance or reluctance. Giving her the courage to push forward, through the wards. The vault was stacked with gold and artifacts, paintings, jewels and galleons haphazardly strewn about. Old books he assumed belonged to the family, strewn about carelessly in about it all. Before she could really begin to wonder where to look, her eye was drawn to the center of the room where an old Hogwarts trunk sat. It was the only thing occupying that part of the room. It looked odd, out of place in its simplicity compared to the extravagant look of the rest of the vault. What's the betting in stereotypic light fashion our answers lay in sight? She asked Narcissa sarcastically, motioning the trunk in front of them. "I wouldn't doubt it," was the simple amused response she received. She bit back, the urge to mock how stupidly arrogant the light side supporters seemed to be. As if they all truly believed themselves the most clever out there, untouchable and beyond reproach in their actions. She moved forward after a moment, forcing her body and mind to work on autopilot like it had done since she was small. Locking all emotion down tightly within. The box contained the initials of her father, G. Pruitt, carved into the top in messy scrawl. It made her cringe. Messy handwriting was something she despised. She had spent far too long having to decipher Harry and Ronald's illegible scree. That now it was something that was guaranteed to occur. Reaching for the clasp to unlock it, Hermione again found the handle pricking her finger before unlocking once it recognized her as Blood. He rolled her eyes but otherwise did not react to. Sitting at the very top of what looked to be a stack of old Hogwarts textbooks was 2 sealed letters. One with her mother's name on it, the other with her name on it. She picked them both up, choosing not to read hers yet. She would much rather wait to be with her mother to do so. She looked through the trunk quickly, not finding much of value at all as she searched it. A few textbooks she took as she hadn't read them yet. The rest she left, not really caring much to take anything else. She could always come back at a later date, if she felt the need to. Nodding to Narcissa, who had waited respectfully by the door, they made their way out and up. Exiting the bank after a last farewell from Rannis and Bogrod, they made their way back through Diagon Alley. Into the leaky cauldron. Hermione was glad to be heading back to Malfoy Manor. Keen to be back beside her mate and debrief with her mother and Tom. Very aware that since before that night in the Ministry, this was the longest she had been away from her Alpha, and she missed the Dark Woman terribly. Not to mention she was rather looking forward to being back in the safety of the manor. Feeling far too exposed and dirty with so many eyes on her for the duration of her visit. She hated being the center of anyone's attention, let alone continually having to determinedly ignore the calm, petting alpha scents and the disapproving glares aimed at her and Narcissa. It was off-putting and entirely unnecessary to have to experience such a thing for simply daring to be a confident Omega. She couldn't wait for the day she could put every single one of her tormentors in their place and show them exactly how much of an error they had made when they had targeted her. She would show them. Hermione Lucretia Caro, child of Electo Caro, family to the Dark Lord and mate of Bellatrix Black, would not ever allow herself to cower again. The end. Thanks for watching. I've added some of product links in the comment section, check them out them too. And don't forget to drop your reviews in comment section.